Colorado for July 23rd, 2018. If you would please stand and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. If the clerk would please call the roll of the members.
Zachary Urban,
Present.
Monica Duran,
Here.
Tim Fitzgerald,
Here.
Janice Hoppy,
Present.
Larry Matthews,
Here.
Leah Dozeman,
Here.
Christy Davis,
Here.
George Pond.
Present.
Mr. Mayor, we have a quorum.
Thank you. Councilors, you have in your packets council meeting minutes for July 9th, 2018, and study session notes of July 18 and July 2nd, 2018. Are there any corrections to the minutes?
Mr. Mayor?
Mrs. Hoppy.
Yes, I'd like to make note that on July 9th, I'm listed as absent excused, but I was at that meeting.
Okay, I'll look into that. And
Yeah, I seconded, you'll see that I seconded something on the second page. It was last week that I wasn't here.
okay,
Thank you, Ms. Janelle.
I'm sorry. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any further amendments to the minutes? Then with that correction, we will let the minutes stand approved as presented. I don't have anything in my packet for proclamations and awards, so we will move to citizens' right to speak. There is a sign-up sheet that is actually being picked up now by our attorney, and you do not need to be on the sheet to speak at this time. This is about items that are not on the agenda, and at the end of everyone who's signed up to speak, we will move to people that have not signed up. So, this is for items other than on agenda items, and when I read your name, if you would please come to the podium, adjust the mic so that we can all hear you. Give us your first name and last name, and spell your last name. Give us your address, and then please proceed to speak. And our first speaker is Chris Lewis and Elizabeth, and Caprate is on deck.
Hi, my name is Christopher Lewis. I live on Appaloosa Drive up in Evergreen. I was contacted by the users of Anderson Park a few months back regarding the baseball lighting situation, and they asked me if I would be interested in pursuing the project to help them come up with something, as the presented options were not viewed as feasible for their level of play. We've gone over a few issues with them, realized that they could use a better system, but what's being presented isn't what they want, and so I contacted the Parks and Rec director, at which point was told that it would be a sole source bid, not available to anybody else, at which point I said, our company isn't interested, we don't pursue sole source bids. Now, being that I live, just a little ways away, and we do this sort of work, they then asked me to come speak at the city council meeting. So here I am to tell you that sole source bidding is a very bad idea. We do our best as a company to try to acquire sole source bids because we can lock it down and make more money. As anybody knows, sole source bidding doesn't do you any good. Putting an alternate bid out there or making it open to other people will help you save money. It seems like the obvious thing to do. It might delay the project a couple of weeks, a couple of months, but at the very least it'll save you some cash. We would be interested in bidding it if that were the case, but the way it's set right now with the Parks and Rec director and how locked down it is, there's really no point in pursuing it any further. But I just wanted to make this point known to you guys as a council that you're not doing yourself any favors. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Our next speaker is Elizabeth Capright and Carolyn Pierce on deck.
My name is Elizabeth Capritta, Capritta. I live at 3500 Esta Street and I'm here to speak about the scraping houses and building 3 stories. And I understand that it's already zoned, Wheat Ridge is already zoned for that and has been for many years. But my husband's family has owned our home since 1958, and we moved in when his parents passed away 20 years ago, and we plan on giving our home to our children when we die, and it's our homestead. And we look at Wheat Ridge as a small town, and we like it that way. Every house on our block is different. It was built at different times and whatever. And I don't mind having 2 stories. We do have 2 stories in our neighborhood. But to go to the 3 stories with the flat roof and make it look like what they've done to North Denver, slashing all the property and making them all look like space age homes. I think it's going to ruin our city to do things like that. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Carolyn Pierce and Dorothy Archer on deck.
My name is Carolyn Pierce, P-E-A-R-C-E, at 3321 Vivian Court. We have lived in that home, 41 years. We love the city. We see changes. Some are good, some are not. The one with these box homes coming in like they did to North Denver, you might as well write saltine on the front of them because that's what they look like, big cracker boxes. They're disgusting. We have dear friends in North Denver where we lived for 13 years. Had one come in. The basement has 1 room. The first floor is a kitchen. The second floor is 2 bedrooms. The third is a living room. I guess if you want 15 rooms, you go 15 stories high. I don't know. But we don't need that in Wheat Ridge. We have beautiful homes. Little homes, big homes, medium-sized homes. But they're made of brick. They have character. They have feeling. Don't let them ruin our city. Please don't let them ruin our city. Put some restrictions in.
If we could just hold our applause, it's really not appropriate.
Restrictions in where they can't come in and do like they did our neighbors in North Denver. You can't see out either side. They build right up to the edge of the 5 feet. They've taken big yards. They have just no backyard and a few feet in front and these tall things. And they have ruined the neighborhoods. And we have a beautiful city. Now, you are in charge. We voted you in to protect us. Please do that. You are important. You're our voice. Please listen and take care of our city. We have 6 generations in Colorado since 1869. People are coming in, they paint the brick homes, they come in one day, they buy a home. A year later, it's up for sale. All they've done is flip it. They've painted the brick. Oh, well, we just didn't like the color. They don't care because we have a city that is taken care of. It's a home that doesn't have to have all the care. It always looks nice, and then they come in, and they're trying to change us, and then they're gone. They come in, they put the trees in the middle of the street to slow the people down,
Thank you.
you are watering it. And
Thank you very much.
we voted for you.
Thank you.
So please think of us.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Our next speaker is Dorothy Archer and Michael Epson on deck.
Name is Dorothy Archer, 3640 Marshall Street. I'm concerned, extremely concerned, with our representatives in our city going so far as to rezone residential areas for the benefit of developers. In our area, District 1, the developers seem quite easy to come, buy a home, scrape it, and go up the 35 feet. Even with a 35-foot bulk plane, this is not a house. I'm asking you again. I'd like to demand, but I know I can't. Request you, please, for someone to make a motion that this issue be brought up in a study session, and this time do it correctly. We have elected officials to represent the citizens. When our neighborhoods are allowed to change the way it is changing, something's wrong with this picture. We are not being represented. Tom Slattery passed out some drawings to you maybe a month ago. He wanted to know if you kept them and studied them. It was pictures of everything you shouldn't do. I passed out a piece of paper to you the last time I was here on a city council meeting, showing you that Jim Smith, the real estate person in Golden, showed that Wheat Ridge is the most sought after city around. And what are they looking after? The demand is for ranch homes. Why would you want to change that? Why are you not protecting that? We said 2 stories would be adequate. What is the matter with the 2-story home? We need to eliminate that 35 feet once and for all. It's done. I'm real comfortable, really, with 27 feet and a slope roof. Is this a beautiful home? I pointed out to you one more time. The duplex that was built on 33rd and Teller, 27 feet, slope roof. Great, quite beautiful. Take a look if you haven't seen it. Thank you.
Thank you. Michael Epson and Michael Griffith on deck.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. My name is Michael Epson. I'm at 2905 Chase Street. I am a 32-year Wheat Ridge resident. The council has seen me a number of times before on the bulk plane issue in District 1 in the R1C. I'm here to speak to you this evening because we think that protection should be pushed into District 2 as well. We're seeing the scraped houses that happened in the R1C move to the north, and they're dealing with the same thing we are, with oversized homes that don't really fit the character of the neighborhood. We're not asking for that much. We'd like to see the 15-foot bulk plane pushed into District 2. We'd also like to see a height restriction that's similar to our surrounding cities. We know Golden, Edgewater, and Lakewood all have a 30-foot restriction at this point. Dorothy would like to see 27. I'd like to see something under 30. But we think that those 30-foot, 35-foot houses are far too high for the continuity of the neighborhood. So I would like to see a motion made by a member of the council to have this studied again for height restrictions for District 1 and 2, and also for the bulk plane extension into District 2. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Michael Griffith.
Good evening. My name is Michael Griffith, 8833 West 32nd Place. Last name Griffeth. I'd like to speak just for a moment about the security at the Carnation Festival Parade. I've lived here 10 years. I'm a member of the Board of Adjustment, and I'm also a member of the Dirt Task Force. I have a wife and 2 small children. This is always a fun time of year, the Carnation Festival Parade. I think everyone enjoys going. I'd like to see additional protection at the festival parade. In recent years, I think everyone's seen the news and of all the vehicles being used as weapons. And now as a former military officer who used to review security plans for bases and deployed locations, I'm quite aware of the extent you could go to protect against various, various things, whether it's your base or your house. And so I realize you can't guard against everything. You can't guard against most things. And you could sure spend a heck of a lot of money doing so. I'd like to find maybe a middle ground or even the start of a hill, somewhere that, what else could we do besides running up budgets? I would like to see City Council consider parking unused city vehicles at intersections along the parade route. When I go to the parade, I see police cars parked at the front and back of the parade, the east to west. But a lot of the intersections, major roads, small roads, people are sitting blind. They put up their folding chair and they got their backs turned to the intersection. So even if it wasn't a terrorist or somebody's out to hurt, what if somebody falls asleep, gets hurt, has a medical episode? I don't know how many city vehicles might be unused, or if we could beg, borrow, and steal for a night from the county or Parks and Rec or somewhere else, but maybe it's something that we could consider parking some vehicles at these intersections. Just as one example, we go to various parades throughout the year. This past month, we went to the parade in Breckenridge. This year at the parade in Breckenridge, they were probably 6 people deep along the entire parade route. And this year, I noticed that they took front-end loaders, they took backhoes, and they parked them perpendicular to the intersections, anywhere from 20 to 30 feet back. But it was just a barrier, an extra barrier that was low cost and easy to obtain, relatively easy. Maybe you got to pay people to come out on the weekend, but I would like to see City Council do that. And I understand it's late in the year. The parade, I should have been up here 6 months ago asking for this, but if it can't happen this year, perhaps it can happen next year. Thank you.
Thank you. That's all of the people that I had signed up on the list. Is there anyone here in council chambers who would like to come and speak on any item other than an item on the agenda? Okay, we will move on to the approval of the agenda. Are there any modifications or changes in the agenda? And Mr. Dahl, you had something you wanted to bring up at this time?
Yes, if I could. I wanted to clarify for the executive session. You'll notice it's listed on your agenda. I'll provide a motion to Councilmember Fitzgerald if he wouldn't mind being the one to make that motion. But I wanted to do 2 things. Let you know that what we will do, or what I'll ask you for, is an executive session, give you legal advice on excess revenue obligations under Tabor. But then I'll be asking you to reconvene the open meeting for any discussion you will have and any guidance that you're going to be giving, any actions to give guidance to the staff around this. This is something staff does need some guidance on. What I want to do is just tell you how Tabor works in this particular circumstance, give you that information, and then ask you to reconvene in the open meeting so we can have discussion, take any action. I want to let you know that that's what the executive session will be about.
Thank you.
Mr. Mayor, point of order.
Mr. Matthews?
I was curious, since this is taxpayer money and all, what is the mechanism or the reasoning for going to executive session instead of just discussing this from the dais?
Well, you certainly can. There's no rule that says you can't take legal advice in public session, and I'm happy to do that as well. What I'd like to, my suggestion, and it's completely up to the council, but my suggestion is that I at least walk you through the requirements that the Tabor, the Constitution, lays upon the city in this particular case, so that you have that information and you know what your options are under Tabor, and then you can certainly discuss them and give direction to the staff. Having said that, if the council would rather have the entire discussion in open session, I'm not adverse to that.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions for Mr. Dahl? Thank you. We'll go to our agenda item number 1. Mr. Pond, would you introduce item number 1?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Item number 1, Council Bill number 17-2018, an ordinance approving the rezoning of property located at 9800 West 38th Avenue from residential 1 to planned residential development, and for approval of an outline development plan, an ODP. This is case number WZ-18-09 Lodick.
Thank you. Excuse me. Thank you. This is a public hearing. It's an ordinance on second reading. It is quasi-judicial. Madam Secretary, do we have an ordinance number for this?
This will be ordinance number 1646.
Thank you. Mr. Goff, do we have a presentation this morning, or this morning,
We do.
this evening?
We do. Senior Planner Meredith Record will be presenting.
This record.
Mr. Mayor.
As this is a quasi-judicial matter, if you intend to speak during this public hearing, would you please rise and take an oath with us? So if you intend to speak, and I have a number of speakers signed up to speak on this blue sheet, if you signed up to speak and intend to speak, please stand and raise your right hand and answer this question. I swear or affirm to tell the whole truth as I understand it in this matter. If you do, please answer, I do.
I do.
You may be seated. Thank you. I'm sorry, Ms. Record, please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of council. Again, for the record, Meredith Record, Wheat Ridge Community Development Department, and I'm here to present case number WZ 18-09, which is a request for approval of a zone change from R1 to planned residential development with an outline development plan. I'd like to enter into the record the case file and packet materials, the zoning ordinance, the comprehensive plan, and the contents of this digital presentation. I guess I'll just continue on then. Again, this is a request for approval of a zone change from R1 to PRD. And as council is probably aware, our zone change process to plan development is a two-step process. The first step is the outline development plan, which approves the zone change and establishes allowed uses and development standards for the property and basic design elements like access points and building locations and so on. The second step in the process is the specific development plan, and that's when we're focusing on specific details such as landscape plans and architecture and final drainage and so on.
Ms. Record, would you excuse me a moment and let me open the public hearing?
Okay.
Thank you. Please proceed.
So in this situation, the applicant is requesting this two-step process. So what we'll be considering tonight is the zone change and the outline development plan only. So the property in question is outlined in red on the image in the aerial photo. 38th Avenue runs along the northern side of the property with Johnson Street on the west. The property is roughly 1.28 acres in size. It's got about 275 feet of frontage along the 38th Avenue portion and 140 feet of street frontage along Johnson Street. The southern portion of the property, which is angled, contains a drainage way that empties into Lena Gulch via an inlet on city-owned property on the west side of Johnson. And I would point out that there's about 20 feet of fall from the northeast corner down to the southwest corner. Again, this is the same aerial photo, which I would note was taken in 2016. And this time we've got the zoning layer on the aerial photo. You can see the property again in red, and the different colors on the image represent different zonings on the surrounding properties and the subject property. Again, the property is zoned R1, and we've got a variety of different zonings and land uses in the area. Directly to the west, on the west side of Johnson Street, is gray-colored area, and that is owned by the city of Wheat Ridge. It's currently vacant. Moving further west, we've got the Apple Ridge Cafe, and then at the southwest corner of Kipling and 38th Avenue is the Kipling Ridge Village, Kipling Ridge development, which was built a couple of years ago. On the north side of the property, we've got some R2 zoning developed into duplexes and single families. Again, around the 38th and Kipling intersection, we've got more commercial zoning and so on. The property to the east is zoned R2A, which is a little bit denser zoning than we typically see with R2. So these are slides of the property. This one is looking northeast. The 38th Avenue is up here at the top of the image. Again, this is a view looking north, and again, Kipling is in the background, 38th Avenue in this area right in here. This is standing on the sidewalk on 38th Avenue looking east along 38th. Looking east again, this is the property. You can see some of the development adjacent. I believe that's a duplex in the background. And this is looking south along Johnson Street. The property in question is located on the left side of the image. So, in your packet, there is a copy of an outline development plan for the property which accompanies the zone change to planned residential development. It does have two sheets in it. This first page is what I like to call the declaration page, and it has a typical cover page, certifications, legal descriptions, signature blocks, and so on. They also have some discussion of the character of the development, what's being proposed, and a list of permitted uses and other notes. So the applicant is proposing the property be developed into 8 duplexes for a total of 16 units. Also allowed would be typical accessory uses for residential, including home occupations and the keeping of household pets. We've also added some notes prohibiting detached accessory structures, RVs, or boat storage, which we've done in the past with some of our newer plan developments. This is the second page of the document. Again, it is the actual graphic of the property. 38th Avenue would be up here at the top with Johnson Street over on the left-hand side. Again, it depicts proposed building locations in these areas, access and landscaped areas. It also establishes the development standards that will govern future development of the site. So this is a little bit closer view that allows you to focus a little bit more into kind of the nuts and bolts of what this concept plan is all about. Again, they're showing 16 units built by 8 duplex buildings. There are 2 access points, one to 38th Avenue and one to Johnson Street, which connect and provide the access into the property. There would be 8 of the units on each side of the private drive, and the units will be facing out, as in the units along the north side will face onto 38th Avenue, and the units on the south side face south down into the open space and the neighborhood below. All of the units will have 2-car garages, which will be loaded from the rear. And there's also some overflow parking, one over at the access with 38th, and then another 4 over at the access with Johnson Street. There's also, I believe, 3 on-street parking spots. There's a large landscape tract shown on the south, down in this area.
and that will help accommodate drainage, detention, and open space. A 5-foot sidewalk is provided on the south side of the interior drive, and then we have an additional pedestrian walk which will come through that south side of the property. As I mentioned previously, there's about a 20-foot grade change from the northeast corner down to the southwest corner. And historically, drainage runoff has followed that pattern, drainage to the south. And runoff for the proposed site will mimic this historical pattern. An underground detention structure will be installed on the southern side of the property, which will take water under Johnson Street into a culvert and eventually to Lena Gulch. Traffic generation has been reviewed by Public Works with the conclusion that traffic from the existing site is not anticipated to have an impact on traffic in the neighborhood. So let's talk a little bit about the zoning on the property. Current zoning is R1, which is the city's largest lot, low-density, single-family development. Minimum lot sizes are 12,500 square feet with 100 feet of lot width. The R1 zoning also allows home businesses and pets. The proposed planned residential development, or PRD, would allow 8 duplexes with a total of 16 units. It would also allow typical in-home types of uses, like the home occupations we see, the keeping of household pets, and so on. So perhaps you're wondering why planned development is being proposed for this. And we have 3 primary reasons. The first one is that there's a provision in the zoning code that if a property is over an acre and is not zoning to either mixed use or industrial, it has to go to a planned development. Mixed use could make sense at this location. However, there are a lot of commercial uses that are allowed in that. There's also a full range of residential, allowing anything from single family up to high density multifamily with 21 units per acre. Industrial does not make sense at this location. So that's why the applicant ended up asking for a planned development. The second reason is the property is challenging because it's got the 20-foot grade change, and then it's got that slanted property line along the south. And this is exactly the type of situation where we want to use planned development, where we can kind of craft the site. We can look at some preliminary site plans while we're going through the zoning to get a sense of how that will work. And then the final reason, and probably one of the most important ones, is that the planned development allows the applicant to craft specific development standards. And in this case, the applicant worked with the neighborhood to try to achieve compatibility by breaking the units apart. Originally, they were shown more as a row house kind of configuration. He lowered the density and broke them into duplexes. There's some limiting heights and some specific roof design requirements as a result of the conversation with the neighbors. And so again, we think the planned development is exactly what is needed on this property. So again, this has been a challenging property to get zoned and developed. We've had a lot of requests for folks who come in and want to rezone it to mixed use neighborhood. But again, the mixed use allows both commercial and residential. And not all those commercial uses are probably appropriate at this location. And then there's no ability to limit within the mixed use zoning to a specific use. And again, as I stated previously, in the mixed use zoning, we can have up to 21 units per acre. This is an area which has a mix of uses and zonings, but it's also adjacent to arterial streets. 38th Avenue is an arterial. Kipling is a major regional arterial, and both of them carry significant amounts of traffic, which makes it questionable whether this is an appropriate low-density site. And then, again, the applicant has worked with the neighbors to try to achieve some compatibility, but was it enough? So again, we think the planned development is exactly what is needed on this property. So again, we're asking for a planned development. And then the final reason is that the applicant has worked with the neighbors to try to achieve some compatibility, but was it enough? So again, we think the planned development is exactly what is needed on this property. So again, we're asking for a planned development. As far as the development standards go, the zone change kind of mixes a balance between the standards that take into context the existing zoning and land use in the neighborhood. So what I've tried to do here is lay out some of the standards for the zoning. In the development standards in the R1 zoning, there's no architectural standards as far as building design or materials to be used. In the plan development, there would be some architectural guidelines that were included in the plan, including a limitation on flat roofs. There's also a 30% masonry requirement. Building height in the R1 is 35 feet, as are all our residential zonings. The applicant is showing on the ODP up to 35 feet on the northern units. However, the second row of units to the south is limited to 2 stories. Building orientation, 30-foot front setback, kind of the typical 50 zoning. Excuse me. Okay, there we go. And as far as the proposed plan development, 15-foot setback from the plan boundary. Density, one of our most important criteria, is 3.6 units per acre under the R1. The proposed plan development is about 12 units per acre, which is really considered a mid-range. Again, we can go up to 21 units per acre in most of our multifamily zonings, including the mixed use, and they're proposing 12. So with regard to process, we had a neighborhood meeting on March 7th. We had pretty good attendance, 15 neighbors and other folks came to give input. There were 2 comment letters submitted, which were included in the packet for Planning Commission. We've gone through our standard referral with no concerns from any agencies. The applicant will be responsible for upgrades to the property. Planning Commission held a public hearing on this on June 7th and did give a recommendation of approval to City Council. There were 7 members of the audience who spoke, and those minutes were included in your packet. City Council, of course, is the final authority, and if the zone change and outline development plan are approved, we still have a couple steps before the property could be developed. That would include a platting process, a subdivision improvement agreement, laying out all the requirements for public improvements, and then a specific development plan review by Planning Commission. So, anytime we have a zone change, we like to do an evaluation of the criteria that's listed in section 26-112E. And I've got those listed on the slide, and I'll go ahead and just go through some of the conclusions that we've made. First of all, that the change of zone promotes the health, safety, and welfare of the community and should not result in significant adverse effects. We've concluded that the property's been underutilized and been the subject of nuisance violations for the owner, including weeds, illegal parking, and dumping violations, and that development of the property is expected to have a positive impact on the neighborhood, both aesthetically and from a property value perspective, and that the project will serve as a transition between 38th Avenue and the low-density neighbors to the south and southeast. Again, all responding agencies have indicated they can serve the property with improvements at the developer's expense. We've concluded that there's a change of character in the area, and although the neighborhoods that abut the property are well-established neighborhoods, a lot of the construction occurred in the 50s and 60s, but that we've had continued development activity along Kipling, and we've had some new commercial redevelopment to the west at Kipling Ridge, and also reinvestment to the south at 26th, or the Golds Market Shopping Center. Kipling is classified as a principal arterial and carries over 39,000 vehicles per day. 38th Avenue carries over 13,000 cars per day. And the city has also invested in the Kipling Street corridor with some federal funding. A couple years ago, city completed the construction of a 10-foot wide multi-use trail that now runs from 26 in front of Crown Hill all the way north to 44th. So that's been a huge improvement to the pedestrian safety and moving folks in the area. Finally, based on increased traffic and intensification of land uses on a corridor, staff does conclude that there are changed conditions which make this property less desirable for low-density residential use. And again, we think the PRD zoning provides a good transition between 38th Avenue and the neighborhoods to the south and southeast. So one of the, excuse me, one of the most significant criteria that we look at in that section for a zone change is consistency with the comprehensive plan. The comprehensive plan envisioned Wheat Ridge was adopted in 2009, and this is, the image is a section from the structure map in that plan. It is showing the site in this yellow area right in here, which is designated as neighborhood. Neighborhood typically calls for places for people to own homes and thrive. Many times these areas are anchored by a school or some other civic use. In this situation, we've got Everett Middle School to the north about a block and a half. We've got Discovery Park across the street, and of course, the rec center further north on Kipling. The red ring in the image identifies 38th and Kipling as a community commercial center. And Kipling is also shown as a primary commercial corridor represented by the red dots. We've seen redevelopment that's occurred in the Kipling Ridge shopping area, and we believe that the duplexes will provide homes that will support the commercial uses and have convenient access to many of the recreation amenities in the area. Just as a reminder, the structure plan is just one piece of the comprehensive plan. There are other goals identified in the plan that are being met by this application. It will provide new housing choices. It will improve an underutilized property. It'll eliminate a maintenance, code enforcement maintenance issue, and it could serve as catalyst for other improvements in the area. So ultimately, staff is giving a recommendation of approval. Again, we believe the zone change will provide a land use transition between 38th Avenue and the low density to the south. The zone change will not result in an adverse effect and could serve as a catalyst for investment. The zone change is supported by the comprehensive plan, and that the evaluation criteria support approval of the request. That concludes my main presentation. We did have a legal protest that was submitted to the city clerk's office earlier this afternoon, and I'd like to enter that into the record. We have a total of, I believe, 10 property letters. We've checked the ownership, and they all are property owners listed in the Jefferson County records. The legal protest provision is detailed in the Charter Section 5.10, and it is another form of allowing residents to express opposition to a zone change in this situation, as long as they meet the following. And Mr. Dahl, feel free to jump on in here whenever you need to. Whether there's 20% of the property included within the proposed zone change area, or I guess the property owners and ownership protest that if they're in the area. 20% of the property extending 100 feet from the side or rear property line of the parcel being rezoned. 20% of the property extending 100 feet from the front property line of a parcel being rezoned, and it cannot include any city-owned property. It can be submitted no later than the city council public hearing, which has had proper noticing, which we have in this situation. And if we find that these are valid legal protests, the voting requires a 3/4 majority vote, which would be 6 votes by city council instead of just a simple majority, sorry. So we took a look at the letters that were entered. Again, the site is outlined in red, 38th Avenue at the top, Johnson over here on the west-hand side. We had 3 property owners along the north, which constituted a 77% 77% of that area. Over on the western side, this is all city-owned land, so it would not qualify. Along the south, we had 3 additional property owners, which is about a 68% adjacency. And then over on the eastern property line, we had two halves of a duplex, which constitute 34% on the eastern side. So these are the properties where folks submitted letters. This blue line right here is the 100-foot radius. And so staff does conclude that there are valid legal protests that have been met. Again, the applicant is in the audience, and I believe he has a presentation. So,
Thank you, Ms. Rickard. We will move next to the applicant's presentation, please.
what do you want? Is that okay?
Hello, my name is Nathan Loddick. I live at 6324 Xavier Court, Arvada, Colorado. I'm the engineer and the developer for the project. First of all, I'd like to thank the mayor and the city council for taking your time tonight to be here. I'd like to thank city staff and Meredith, who reviewed this project several times and just gave the presentation you just saw. I'd like to thank the neighborhood for holding, I think we had 3 or 4 group meetings and then a couple individual meetings. I met with people on the side. Especially I would like to thank a few, Fran, Margaret, Rich, Don, Diane, Jerry, Dada, Guy, and others who are here. Some of them opened their homes for some of these meetings, and we discussed the project to try to come to something that everybody could be happy with. I can assure you that not everybody here is happy with the final outcome, but I think a deal sometimes where nobody is happy might just be a good deal. I think we could have ended up maybe with a little bit denser of a project. They would like it a little bit less dense. So I think a happy middle ground was met, but we'll see how things go tonight, I guess. I want to start by saying the original meeting we had held at the rec center there, we proposed a layout of 23 townhome units that would have been in 5 separate buildings, and that was a couple units less dense than what PRDs are allowed to have. It was less than the 23 units per acre, I think, is what was allowed. And after the feedback of the original meeting, we went back and changed the concept to just have townhomes along 38th and duplexes to the south to kind of have a transition to the single-family homes you see there to the south. Then we held a second neighborhood meeting at one of the neighboring homes, and the next one was a phone conference, and it was stated that they were still not happy with that. So we went back, we crunched some more numbers, and we said, okay, we'll do all duplexes. We got down to 16 units, and with today's economic climate and how high construction costs is and land costs are and development costs, water, sewer, tap fees, everything else, that's pretty much the least dense that we could make it work from an economic basis. If somebody else thinks they could come in here and build maybe $4 million houses and they could successfully sell those in this neighborhood, then maybe it would be a viable project for somebody like that. But talking to all the real estate agents and everybody, it doesn't seem like a viable price point for the area, unfortunately. So I think after the third meeting, we agreed to add some additional architectural standards. We added a 30% requirement for brick or stone or other veneers, and we also limited the ability of these structures to have flat roofs. Nobody here or in the neighborhood was in favor of flat roofs. They all kind of like or even just single plane roofs. So you can't do a single plane roof that has just one pitch one way. It's going to have to be some sort of a roof with a multi-pitch structure. And then what we also did is on the homes to the south of the private drive, we limited those to 2 stories. We did that for several reasons, I think. One is to kind of limit the height as we transition down to the ranch homes to the south. And 2, for the house on the cul-de-sac with the gray or silvery light-colored roof, it prevents the houses from blocking their view plane over to the mountains. So from their deck, a person of average height of, let's say, 5 foot, 5'6" or whatever, will be able to see over the roof structures to the south of that private drive, and their view will not be obstructed. On 38th Avenue, we kept the height limit the same as in the R1 zoning, but in effect, if you're standing on 38th Avenue and you're looking to the south at the project, it will look like a two-story structure because the lower floor will be buried into the ground because there is so much terrain coming across the site. We had to bring that drive aisle as it comes off of 38th down at a pitch, and then so the garages will essentially be under the main level on those units on 38th. So even from the houses to the north of 38th, looking across the street at the project, it'll appear as if it were almost a two-story development for them. But even with that height, we did another study for the house on the north side of that cul-de-sac against 38th, and they will still also maintain their view over the roofs of the proposed homes because on that site there is a retaining wall that's existing along the eastern boundary of the project that sets those houses in that cul-de-sac pretty high up compared to where these future houses will be. So, you know, we did everything that we could to work with the neighborhood to try to appease some of their concerns, to bring it down to a density that is viable and that builders can build successfully and make money on. And that is how we got to where we are today. I'm sure you'll hear from a lot of the neighbors now, and if you guys have questions, I don't know if I take questions now or after they talk, but
I think we'll probably get all the presentations and then go for questions later.
thank you.
Thank you very much. I would like to now open it up for public comment on this. I have a pretty full sheet, so I will call your name and call the person on deck. So if you hear your name called on deck, if you would get ready to be able to come to the podium. When you get to the podium, please adjust it so that you can speak into the microphone and we can hear your comments. If you would give us your first name and last name and spell your last name and give us your address, and then comments run 3 minutes max. Okay, we've got a few more. Thank you. So our first speaker is Don McDougall and Margaret Nelson on deck.
My name's Don McDougall. Last name spelled M-A-C, capital D-O-U-G-A-L-L. I've got a lot of history on this property. We moved into our place in the 60s, and we rented the pasture to the east of this project. We were right away, I think it was late 60s, we rented that. We had some horses. Our kids were into that stuff. And there was an old fellow living there with his sister, and he died, and she couldn't take care of herself. There was a 2-story house on it and some outbuildings. So she moved out, and the family came to me and said if I would keep the weeds down, irrigate the grass, keep the fences up, and keep people out of the house, that I could use that for my horses. That was in the 70s. The place next door that has the duplexes on it now, was our old pasture, was built in the 80s, I think. I can't remember for sure. Late 80s, I think. So we ended up with this piece of property, and we used it until 2002. And the lady that owned it at that time came to me and said that the city had hired some outfit to go around and find blight. And they found her, they called her place Blight. So they told her to do something about it, and she went in, she hired somebody to come in there, and they fooled around. They cut down a bunch of fruit trees, cut off some other brush. It was grown over, had a lot of nice trees on it, a lot of fruit trees. So whoever came back from the city came out and said it wasn't good enough, so she clear cut it. Now to me, that's blight. That wasn't blight before with those fruit trees and all that on there. So we decided we just pull out of there, and we couldn't use it. They took the fences down, and there's some story on that too, but I don't want to get into that. Anybody got any questions about it? This is going to change the ambience of our place. We look right down into that property, and I don't know what we're going to see. We're going to see something we haven't been seeing. And I don't know. If there's anything else that I could answer for you, I'd be glad to do it. I'm concerned about the traffic too, but if it's bad, we can get out of there anyway.
Thank you.
Any questions?
I think we'll take questions later, but thank you very much, sir.
Well, it's the ambience, I say again, that's the whole thing that I'm going to have trouble dealing with. Been there a long time. Thank you.
Thank you. Margaret Nelson and Fran Singer on deck.
I'd like to present later on.
Yes, ma'am. Okay, Margaret Nelson and Jane Harvey on deck.
I'm Margaret Nelson, Nelson, 9865 West 37th, so I'm adjacent to the land in question. I'm mostly speaking tonight because I was unhappy with the summary of my comments from the Planning Commission meeting. I didn't think they really represented what I was talking about, so I was unhappy with the summary of my statements at the Planning Commission. I didn't think they represented the gist of my talk, which is simply that I only moved here like 2.5 years ago, having been forced out of my home of 30 years in Denver, living in a construction zone for 3 years as my neighborhood was destroyed around me. And I went into significant debt last year improving my property with landscaping and a new deck and solar panels. And I know from experience that if this kind of zoning establishes a foothold, then basically your home, no matter how nice it is worth no more than the land it's on from then on. And I really want some kind of assurance from the city that I understand this property needs to be developed. I get that. But I want this to be a one-off thing. I don't want this high-density zoning coming down to the south and southeast into the established, really, really nice R1 neighborhood and turning it into the monstrosity that I left behind in Denver. I mean, it really is important. You know, this is a nice neighborhood. It's you know, it's pretty. People are nice. You know, you can see the sky. You know, I don't look out my windows and look at walls, which is what I was seeing in Denver. And granted, where I am now, I've got a land buffer, I've got trees. They can't do it to me like they did there. But, you know, not everybody's got as much land as I do. And nobody wants to see what happened in Denver happen in Wheat Ridge. Nobody wants to see that. So please don't do this to us. That's all I'd ask of you. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Idella Lewis and Douglas Linder on deck.
I'm not speaking.
Thank you. Douglas Linder on speaking, and Eloise Newell on deck.
My name is Douglas Linder, live in 3610 Johnson Street, Linder. I've been in my house 15 years now. It was built in 55. I've been in the house 15 years now. I was there when the park was built and all that. I still got issues with the park. Oh yeah, that maintenance guy on a weekend forgets to lock the door. I have to call the police to have them come over and lock the maintenance garage. That's another subject. So if the city council approves this, will it be the toehold as Margaret discussed? Will this start happening all over Wheat Ridge now as we turn around and all these little pieces of land, and there's some out there that we need to get developed. I mean, just nature of the beast. We came across the ocean and developed this whole great country. So that's one of my major concerns is, will these places like this start popping up? And then if they are built, will they turn into rentals, or will there be some covenants and stuff incorporated with it, no more than 5% or whatever can be rented out? That's the other thing, is how do you keep a value on something like this 20 or 30 years from now as everybody changes and things change? That's one of the things that I have. I do have a condo that I rent out, and there's always that discussion. How many rentals do you have? I'm not getting rich off of this thing. I was hoping my kid was going to move in there. That's kind of my concerns about it. Is like, is this going to be the toehold? There's all these little pieces of land around Wheat Ridge that somebody's going to want to develop. I don't know. That's about all I got. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Our next speaker is Eloise Newell and Theodosia Fedu, on deck.
Hi, my name is Eloise Newell. Newell is Newell. And I'm here to read a letter from my neighbor, Pat Roush, and she lives at 9845 West 34th Drive. And she says, I use 38th and Johnson to utilize Kipling Street due to the hazard conditions getting onto Kipling from West 34th Drive. It is not safe. Creating more congestion at 38th and Johnson would make it difficult to use the street intersection. So you're kind of trapping us in, I think. Also, please consider the safety of the residents and also the children that utilize the Discovery Park. Thank you, Pat Roush. So that's on her behalf. On my behalf, I'm on 34th and Kipling, our 34th Drive, just east of Kipling. Been there since 1980. Kids went to Wheat Ridge, Everett, and been active in community, coached, supported kids in all kinds of activities. And I really am concerned of the congestion and the safety. Kipling is a nightmare from 3 p.m. to at least 6 p.m. and in the mornings from, anymore, 6:30 to 9. It is congested. You can hardly get on. When you're going from Kipling to I-70, I go to Wadsworth. It's much faster because first of all, Kipling is congested, and then you wait at the light on the entrance into I-70. So if I need to get to I-70, I go to Wadsworth. And I used to hate Wadsworth because it was congested. But Kipling is even worse. And I am very, very concerned, after teaching for 35 years, about the children that use the Discovery Park, because it will increase the traffic tremendously. And those kids use that skateboard park. They have picnics there, and you're going to increase the traffic to where I think that's going to be a very unsafe condition. So thank you very much. And I don't think I said what my address is. I gave you Pat's. Mine is 9870 West 34th Drive. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Our next speaker is Theodosia Fedu and Lourdes Weingart on deck.
Hello, my name is Theodosia Fedak. I live on 4100 Miller Street. I support the protest about the density, and I give my minutes to the representative of us. Thank you. Sorry, to Fran.
Thank you. Okay, our next speaker is Lourdes Weingart and Jane Harvey on deck.
Hi, I'm Lourdes Weingart, Weingart. I live at 3935 Independence Court. I spoke at the last meeting, and I just want to say again, my husband and I moved from northwest Denver, because of what was happening there, and the scraping of the homes and building these monstrous places, and the congestion, and the noise, the lack of parking. We just don't want that to happen in Wheat Ridge. We moved out of there almost 8 years ago because of it. And I would hope that as council members that you would not support and agree on changing the R1 zone, because like the gentleman was saying, what else, if you do it now, what is it going to look like in the future? Are we going to be seeing the same kind of things that's happening in North Denver, in Wheat Ridge? And so I hope that you will consider that. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Jane Harvey and Chris Dickerman on deck. Yes, you may.
I'm Jane Harvey, Harvey. I live at 4695 Robb Street in District 4, Wheat Ridge. I moved to Wheat Ridge in 1972 and have been a resident for 46 years. And I also work for the Wheat Ridge Historic Park, and I'm the museum host and tour guide, and I am against the scraping off of the buildings and building the big box buildings. And we are trying to research all the homes built before 1920, and we're going to try to do a report on all the older homes and hope to have that done within the next year. And again, just, you know, I love all the old homes and all the history.
Thank you very much. Our next speaker is Lance Dickerman and Donald Barnes on deck. Thank you. Our next speaker is Donald Barnes and Deline Norak on deck.
Mr. Mayor, council members, thank you for the opportunity to speak. I live at 3520. My name is Donald Barnes, Barnes. My address is 3520 Allison Court. I just want to add my voice to those who are concerned about increasing the density. The traffic is continually increasing. I also was curious about whether or not the setbacks would be appropriate in the future from 38th. I think that there may be a possibility. 38th has already been widened once. If 38th is determined needs to be a 4-lane road, are those setbacks adequate or not? Are we prepared for where it needs to be 20, 30 years from now? Many of the homes, most of the homes in Wheat Ridge have been here at least half a century or more. I think it's a minority of homes that are built more recently than that. At any rate, I hope that those considerations have been carefully considered and will be considered, and I think that the zoning should remain in R1. I thank you for your time.
Thank you, sir. Our next speaker is Deline Norak and Russell Prager on deck.
Elaine Novak, I live at 9795 West 38th, directly across from the exit onto 38th. I do not believe there's been a true traffic study through there. The speed coming down from the hospital, people are clocking on that hill. Because I sit out there and I enjoy the evening and I can see the park and the development of sprouts that have happened. But the safety, there does need to be a traffic study, a real one. Because I've seen, you've had it up the road towards the hospital. So whenever I pull out of my driveway, I have to either get in the center because the traffic in the morning, the commute, I got to get to work. So I've got to pull out into the center divide lane. If there's more people coming out of that driveway, I can already see, you know, a potential hazard right there. Plus, when the snow comes, with the height, is going to be black ice. I know it melts. Right now, there's sun that hits it, and it drains pretty good. But if you can imagine, I've seen it happen with these on Sheridan and 29th where they have built up high. And there's no sun to melt the snow. So that's my concern. It will be the snow and ice and then plus the traffic. And did I mention how many ambulances come up and down? What kind, you know, and they're going to go 2 stories, 3 stories? That sound barrier, or, you know, the sound that'll be traveling up, that's not going to be a really good quality of life for the future occupants of those townhomes. Okay, that's it.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Russell Proger and Maria Figlis on deck. Thank you. Our next speaker is Maria Figlis and Jerry Wade on deck. Please come to the microphone so we can hear you. Thank you. Jerry Wade is our next speaker, and Sarah Smith on deck.
Hi, my name is Jerry Wade. Live at 9845 West 37th Avenue. I am dead center on the southern edge, right in the middle. I walk both sides of the fence. Nobody likes change. Nobody wants to see it developed, but to me it's also unrealistic. What they proposed with the improvements, the 30% of brick, stone, everything, I really don't have an issue with it. My favorite, as opposed to what could be. Thanks.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Sarah Smith and Susanna Coates on deck. Okay. Okay, the time limit to give away is, there's a total of 9 minutes, so nobody's going to speak more than 9 minutes. So, just so you understand that. Evan Smith is our next speaker, and Warren Butler on deck.
I am Evan Smith. I live at 4520 Teller Street. My wife and I are new to Wheat Ridge. We moved here very recently. We moved in part from North Denver to get away from the development. Our other home was built in 1949 there and was beginning to be surrounded by large homes that overshadowed it. I think that is a consideration, the height, as far as what that does to a community, and also the spacing of not just from the buffer from the main roads, but also the buffers between houses of actual lawn is something that needs to be taken into consideration as well. Not against development, but also the 30% brick. I've seen that type of architecture in North Denver, and it doesn't do much to blend with the surrounding neighborhoods. So that's also a consideration. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Warren Butler and Guy Stanfield on deck.
Is there any more minutes to give, or you're not accepting any more minutes to defer?
When your time to speak, if you had come up here and want to speak or give your time, then you may do so at that time.
My name is Warren Butler, B-U-T-L-E-R, 9625 West 36th Avenue. I've lived in my house since 99, 20 years, following having lived there with my parents since 1958. I've seen many changes in the neighborhood, in the surrounding area. I guess my biggest issue is there's just 16 is still too many for this neighborhood. Maybe half that, but 16 is still too much. If you look at and I don't dispute the traffic studies having been done on 38th and Kipling, they can probably hold a whole lot more traffic than they do now. That's unfortunate, but it's the case. But if we look at dumping 16 more residences, possibly 2 cars per resident, we're adding 32 more vehicles that are going to have to come out on Johnson or directly on 38th. And as it's been pointed out before, there's a lot of issues with coming out onto 38th at certain times of the day. That traffic is going to ultimately end up going up Johnson to 37th, on to Independence and try to come out on Independence, or it's going to go up 37th to Holland and try to exit south up Holland. And I don't think any of our neighbors on 37th and Holland would appreciate that extra traffic there. I also have an issue with the fact that you have 16 units, and the plan shows space for 6 visitor parking spaces. If you look at Iris Court, and you see the number of cars that are parked in Iris Court, and those who live on Iris Court can probably verify this better than I can, but when you have that many homes and you have visitors there, it's going to utilize more of those parking spaces than 6. And those people are going to go park where? They're going to park at the park, or they're going to park on 37th, or they're going to park on Johnson where they're not supposed to park. There's no place on 38th for them to park. So those are the two main issues I have. Number of parking spaces and the traffic in the neighborhood. Not so much Kipling or 38th, but in the neighborhood itself. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Guy Stanfield and Henry Luthwaite on deck.
My name's Guy Stanfield, 9870 West 37th Avenue. And did you say I could donate my time, or did you say that like someone already had enough time?
You may donate your time if you'd like to tell me who you would like to donate it to. Mr. Figlis. Okay. Very good. Thank you. All right. Our next speaker is Henry Luthwaite and Becky Luthwaite on deck.
My name's Henry Luthwaite. I want to donate my time to Mr. Figlis also.
Thank you.
Becky Luthwaite, and I'm donating my time as well.
To
Ehor.
Mr. Figlis?
Yes.
Thank you so much. Our next speaker is Ehor Figlis. Certainly. We'll go to Fran Singer.
Hello? Testing. I want to make sure my voice is heard and that you are listening. I'm a teacher. All eyes on me. No. All right. The city of Wheat Ridge was created in 1969 because the residents in this area did not want to be part of the urban sprawl and rampant annexation that was going on in Denver at that time. As such, the Wheat Ridge community should always be concerned about plans that try to bring in Denver-like high-density developments that impact the unique character and less urban nature of this locality and our neighborhood. The proposed development is a perfect example of a proposed development. The envisioned Wheat Ridge comprehensive plan continuously refers to the need for maintaining a balance between the key values of promoting redevelopment along primary corridors and focusing on retaining the character of existing neighborhoods. Remember, it's in your plan. There is no evidence in the Planning Division staff report that the existing character of the neighborhood was considered. The existing character of the neighborhood was considered. Now it tells me to stop and breathe. Okay. Wheat Ridge, whoever Wheat Ridge is, has determined that up to 23 units can be placed on a planned residential development. Oh, this is the rezoning proposed for the current single-family
parcel. However, every parcel in our city is different. Every neighborhood is different. We believe both the developer and the city need to focus not on what is allowable, but what is reasonable and beneficial to the area that is to be impacted by this development. Based on numerous discussions with the residents of the neighborhood, of my neighborhood, City Council should understand that the neighborhood is not anti-growth and not anti-development of the parcel in question. It is a question of unit density on the parcel, which Eco will speak to later. The adjacent Iris Court parcel development has 5 duplexes comprising 10 residential units and is similar in size to the parcel under consideration. Therefore, a 16 or 23 unit development is not only out of character with the neighborhood, but it is out of character with the multifamily development next door. A density like Iris Court would be far more acceptable than the current proposed development. I would also like to point out that the staff plan made numerous unsubstantiated conclusions about the benefit of this proposed development, such as stating that it is a transition between the neighborhood and the Kipling, Kipling corridor. The conclusion, it's not written there, the conclusion is that this is a good thing, but no significant benefit to the neighborhood was identified. Only benefits to those who would inhabit the new development and your financial zone around you. Again, that's who benefits. Our neighborhood does not. Again, no balancing criteria in the staff report were provided. It should be noted that the neighborhood has successfully transitioned with the Kipling corridor for 48 years, before you were born, without the development in question. I get nervous, so I joke. But no joking matter. Lastly, I should point out a critical element missing in the staff report, a traffic study, and should consider the following. 1, the existing neighborhood traffic. 2, the Discovery Park traffic, which is greater than originally anticipated. It should include the proposed development. Also, the rumored redevelopment of the Apple Ridge Cafe property. The concern by the neighborhood for increased traffic on streets that were never designed to handle this increase. For example, Johnson, never designed for your proposed development. And the other thing that needs to be considered are potential safety concerns. These are real concerns for children and pedestrians, and a general lack, the other thing that needs to be considered, a general lack of integration with the existing neighborhood. It is for these reasons the proposed rezoning should not be approved. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Ihor Figlis.
Good evening. My name is Ihor Figlis. I live at 9775 West 36th Avenue. In the letter, the applicant states that the rezoning is in conformance with the comprehensive plan. He states that the property is within a commercial and recreational center district. This is not correct. The comprehensive plan clearly shows that the property is a neighborhood zone. Further, it is not a neighborhood buffer zone or revitalization area. The comprehensive plan states that the number one priority in neighborhood areas is the preservation of established neighborhoods. A stable neighborhood is defined as having consistent character, mature landscaping, high rates of reinvestment and home ownership, consistent maintenance, and high desirability. Our neighborhood fits all these criteria. The change of zone promotes health, safety, and general welfare of the community and will not result in a significant adverse effect on the surrounding area. This was stated in the letter. To add to the comments already made, as to traffic, the applicant states that this development will add 1% of the traffic counts on 38th Avenue. But he neglects to say what is the impact of that amount of traffic. Did you know that the intersection at Johnson and 38th has 4 times as many traffic accidents as nearby neighboring streets? You weren't aware of that, were you? Because the City Planning Commission didn't point that fact out to you. They didn't look it up. It's in the Jefferson County database. The Planning Commission also find that at least one of the following conditions exists. This is from his letter. The change of zone is in conformance or will bring the property into conformance with the City of Wheat Ridge Comprehensive Plan goals, objectives, and policies, and other related policies or plans for the area. In his letter, the applicant states that the rezoning is in conformance with the comprehensive plan. He states that the property is within a commercial and recreational center zone. It's not correct. A change of character in the area has occurred or is occurring to such a degree that is in the public interest to encourage redevelopment of the area or to recognize the changing character of the area. The commercial area to the west has always been commercial. It's been commercial for a long time. Only the tenants have changed. The residential area is stable, and changes have been positive, significant investment in our neighborhood. In conclusion, we as a neighborhood believe that you have heard enough testimony to show that this rezoning is not warranted. In addition, the zoning documents contain errors. I would like to, at this time, can I put this up? So the graphic that you're seeing in front of you is a lot size comparison of this proposed redevelopment. The green area bounded is the area across the street on the north side of 38th Avenue. Okay, it consists of 5 homes. The blue area consists of the West Haven subdivision, 46 homes. West Haven subdivision is in blue. It has 46 homes. It's the bulk of the homes in the area. The Iris Court development subdivision, which was mentioned, is the yellow area, has 10 homes. The proposed redevelopment is going to give us lot sizes that is designated by the red. Now, is this a transition to what? It's not a transition from the north side of 38th Avenue as stated by the Planning Commission to the south side of 38th Avenue to the West Haven neighborhood. It's not a transition from the Iris Court neighborhood to any of the neighborhoods there. It's not a transition. It's blight in our neighborhood. The applicant has stated in his letter that, or has stated to the neighbors that this development is going to consist of starter homes. Starter homes don't fit in this neighborhood. They will bring a detrimental effect to the property values and not a positive effect to increasing property values, as you heard some state today. In addition, I would like to point out that this, I don't know if you paid attention to this, but the garages, the two-car garages are going directly up to the street line. There are no driveways. Excess cars have no place to park. There's a few parking spots designated in the neighborhood, but they are far inadequate, as somebody pointed about the Iris Court neighborhood. There is a proposal to, is saying there's going to be on-street parking. There's no proposal for widening Johnson Street. And Johnson Street, as I pointed out, already has problems with traffic accidents. And you heard also today the additional problems that were going to be caused by shade on West 38th Avenue, which is going to be detrimental to traffic, to melting of snow and ice, and is going to end up causing more accidents because it's a downhill slope. People come flying down that hill, and they're not going to be able to stop. Thank you.
Thank you. That concludes all of the people that I have signed up on the list to speak on this item. Is there anyone else in our audience who would like to speak? Please come forward and give us your name and address, and if you would spell your last name.
My name is Odarka Figlus, Figlus, and I live at 10580 West 34th Avenue at 34th and Nelson. And I just want to say I really agree with all the neighbors, and I know they've been putting in a lot of time and effort into this, but there's a lot at stake here. But not just for that neighborhood, I think for our city as a whole. As you look up and down any part of our city, you have to take a look and see what fits in with the neighborhood and how do we preserve that unique character that the comprehensive plan points out is one of our top characteristics. Putting in high-density residential and calling it a buffer between low-density residential and even lower-density residential doesn't make sense to me. To me, that sounds like spot zoning. Everything around there is zoned R something. There is no planned residential development in the area. There's no reason the applicant could not have come in here with a normal subdivision proposal and proceeded some different way. The fact that he came down from 23 units to 16, well, he didn't come down from 23 to 16. He took it from 5 up to 16. To me, I don't have children, but I've seen enough toddlers around and kids that just seems like a typical ploy. You ask for a lot, and then you back it down a little bit, and all of a sudden that sounds pretty good. But it's not pretty good, not when the infrastructure is not there to support that development. And I would ask you to please vote against this, because there are errors in that document that he's presenting. There are in the actual zoning document. He has not met the criteria. It's his responsibility to show that the criteria have been met, and simply coming up with a statement saying this is beneficial and not giving us any background on that, that is not sufficient. We can all make up stuff out of the air. But I think you've heard a lot of testimony here from people, sincere testimony, that shows that there are problems here, and this is not the perfect solution. And when he says that we can't build single family in Wheat Ridge, I'm sorry, there are 2 developments going on to the west, and I know there's a proposed single family to the east. Right across from Walmart, from the old Walmart, we have mansions. Don't tell me that we can't build high quality single family there. Challenges with the slope. Gosh, go up the hill and talk to all the people that live on that hillside. They all have challenges with the slope. And those challenges with the slopes are actually part of the assets of that property, and something that can actually, for the homes up above there, the slope is the asset. It gives them views. This development doesn't take any of that into consideration. And putting in starter homes and saying that that's going to somehow magically lift the house values or the property values in the area just doesn't make sense. And so I think there are just too many questions and too many issues with this. They have not fulfilled their obligations. And I was reading today in the state statutes regarding zoning, and I left my quote over at my chair. If you want me to get it, I can get it, but basically in their annotations, it's, actually, do
may I go get my quote, or? Yeah. Essentially what it says is that, I'll just remember it, that it is reasonable to turn down a zoning in order to preserve neighborhood character and neighborhood density. So, and if you want, I can find that for you later and give you that quote.
That's fine.
Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else in our chambers tonight who would like to speak on this issue? Okay, I don't see any more public comment on this issue, so I'm going to open the hearing up now to council for questions of staff or the applicant or any of the speakers who have come forward and spoken on this. Mr. Fitzgerald.
I have questions of Meredith. I have 3 questions, Meredith. Are there parking spots for the garages?
There, each of the units has 2 garage spaces, but there is not a driveway space behind those.
So the ones that face 38th Avenue, would they park on the sidewalk then?
No, they wouldn't park in, I mean, it's intended that those garage spaces be used by the homeowners.
So wait, I was wrong. Those garages point inward, right? So that's okay. I got that. And I'd like to know from the developer, what price are these homes?
I cannot dictate what price somebody will build a house and sell these for, but all the models that we have run and other people are looking at is anywhere from $475 to the low $5s. And I don't know about everybody in this room, but I personally would find it kind of offensive to think that somebody buying a $475,000 half of a duplex would not be an asset to the neighborhood.
Please.
I personally could not even afford that.
So you would not characterize these as starter homes?
No, in the original plan, when we had 23 townhome units, we described building those and trying to have a for sale value of somewhere in the 390 to low 4 range, which I still think is a stretch for a lot of people. But it's lower cost, even the 450 to 500 or 475 to 525 or whatever it's going to end up being. It's lower than any new build going on in Wheat Ridge right now.
Wow. Thank you very much.
Additional questions from Mr. Matthews?
How does that work if these are going to be individual ownerships? I see no dividing property line in the middle of the duplex. How is that handled through the paperwork and the title?
Yeah, I think when it goes to plat, there will be a property line that would split each duplex lot in half for fee simple lots for individual owners of both sides. In making this plan, I just used I asked for an example set from Wheat Ridge, and it's consistent with other plans that show duplex lots, just to show one building envelope for each duplex. In the ODP phase, in the future, it would be split into individual sides.
I'll get back to you. Thank you.
Thank you. Additional questions or comments from council? Mr. Pond.
For Meredith. A couple of things. One, Meredith, can you, and you may scroll to the zoning overlay map, there's some adjacent R districts, and I'm just curious if you can give us a summary of the densities of in R2 or the R2A.
Let me grab your notes.
Thank you.
Let's see. So the R1, which minimum lots sizes are 12,500 square feet, usually ends up being a density from 3 to 4 units per acre. When you're talking R2, which allows single family and duplexes on smaller lot sizes, it's around 6 to 7 units per acre. So that would be what this northern row of homes, if they were maximized, what could be developed. This Iris Court subdivision, it's a little bit tricky because it's zoned R2A, which is a denser step up from R2, and I think it's about 4,300 square feet per unit, and you end up with about 10 units per acre, 9 to 10. What's a little bit funky about this one is, or not funky, but different, is this is a dedicated public street, and so I remember we did a waiver, and it is narrower than the standard. But anyway, this one is being shown as a private drive, whereas this one was a dedicated public street.
And just to continue that thought, an R3 is then one more step dense?
R3 is one more step. It's about 3,600 square feet per unit. It's more like 12 to 14 units per acre.
Okay. And then I know there's been some discussion on traffic studies as well as probably some traffic interpretation. So if I can just ask you to go through the decision, I think, on whether or not the study was needed for the occupants and the density that it's at, and why you passed on that study, as well as perhaps if there is traffic data on adjacent streets, if you can talk about that.
Yeah, and I don't really have a lot. They did provide some trip generation information that our public works review, but typically at this stage, we look at the general classifications of what the streets are, what we think the carrying capacity. Johnson Street is going to have some widening occur to it. If the development goes through, they will be responsible for installing curb gutter and sidewalk on that eastern side of Johnson, the eastern side, which will end up, providing some additional room there for some on-street parking.
Okay.
Additional questions, Mr. Matthews?
I live in the neighborhood. I drive by it every day. Iris Court doesn't have enough parking. I mean, people park right next to the stop sign at 38th on both sides of Iris Court, east and west, and they park cattywampus in the cul-de-sac because there's not enough parking. I don't believe there's enough parking on this site to justify that kind of density. And people point out of there literally because you're on the peak of a hill or on Iris Court. I don't know how they see around the parked cars. I think that's a real danger, and it's a real problem for this site. I'm having a hard time justifying that kind of density in what's basically an R1 neighborhood. Here we go again, 35-foot high, property line to property line. I'm really not in favor of this development.
Thank you. Please, I'd like everyone not to applaud. This is not a concert. It's not a popularity contest, and it's inappropriate. So if you'd please refrain from that. Thank you. Ms. Duran.
Thank you. Meredith, can you tell me if the setbacks are adequate on 38th Avenue?
I guess that depends on what you mean by adequate. In a lot of our mixed-use zone districts, we allow even closer. The buffer and setback along 38th Avenue is proposed to be 15 feet. And like I say, in a lot of the commercial areas we have, they can go to a 0 setback line. So it depends on what your interpretation of adequate is.
Okay, because I'm considering, I know that there's, the neighborhood, obviously, there's, a school across the other way, so I'm just trying to figure out if that's really sufficient. My other question is, do we have any idea what's going on with the proposed Apple Ridge restaurant?
I don't have that information available.
Okay, so no updates there. Okay, I'll hold off for right now on my other questions.
Ms. Dozeman?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I had a couple questions. I wanted to refer to Bill Gordon's letter about the vault and line, the water issue there.
So that's about the irrigation ditch.
Mhm.
I'm going to defer to the applicant.
Yes, I met on site with him. There's an old irrigation vault on the site. The water rights were sold to Consolidated Mutual by the current landowner a few years ago, and that vault is usually currently used as a backwash. I guess they open a valve and they let it pour out to clear some of the debris out of the line, and basically what will happen is we'll just install a new valve on the sidewalk if the development's approved, obviously, and tie that into a storm sewer inlet that's just adjacent, maybe 20 feet to the west on 38th Avenue, and they'll be able to perform the same function without that vault being on the property.
Thank you. And then my second question, I believe, is for staff. Could any of you speak to the statement that Mr. Figlis made about 38th and Johnson having 4 times the amount of accidents as any other intersection?
I can't comment on that. I'm not aware of that. I've texted the police chief to see if he would know, but he hasn't heard back. I haven't heard back yet.
Thank you. So would the city be amenable to doing a traffic study in this phase? Or what are your thoughts on that?
It's my understanding that based on the public works requirements for when a traffic study is triggered, that all that was triggered here based on the trip generation estimates that they did was just that, and that they found it to be adequate to handle on the local street network. I mean, rough math, duplexes generate about 10 trips a day on average based on the ITE traffic estimates. So 16 units is 160 units a day. Well, most local streets don't carry more than, probably less than 1,000 trips a day. The capacity of a local street is probably up to 2,000 or 3,000 trips a day, so it's well within those thresholds.
One item to note as well is we always do a referral to the police department anytime we get a land use case, particularly a zone change, come in, and they did not express any concern as far as those numbers.
Thank you. Ms. Davis.
I have more comments than questions.
Okay. Are there other questions from councilors? Mr. Urban.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. With respect to the drainage plan for the property, there was some discussion about the placement of the detention pond and relative to where property or townhomes will be built, and so I'm curious how that's going to look and what that will provide for.
Again, at the online development stage, it's typically pretty minimal information we get. We look at basically a concept plan of the drainage. This area down here, which has currently accommodates some irrigation waters and some other detention types of flows that go through it, is where that where the detention area would be. Nathan, I don't know if you would like to expand on that?
The initial idea is to actually utilize some of the space underneath this parking and this whole square area here to use arched underground chambers to do the detention below ground. It provides a couple benefits in my opinion. It's just out of sight. It's a lot of times these detention ponds aren't very sightly. They get a lot of weeds in them and other things, so it allows a usable kind of amenity space on top that they just need to mow and other things. Yeah, I guess that's the main benefit in my opinion. It's just, kind of out of the way.
Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Davis.
So Meredith, I have just a quick question. If you can help jog my memory, hopefully you have it in your memory. Recently, in the last month, council approved a development off of Yarrow over in my neck of the woods. Comparison density-wise, I know numbers-wise, that was like 76 units.
Actually, it was a total of 89.
89?
With both phases.
And
that was on 4.5 acres.
Okay.
So this is 1.2 acres was 16. So I think this is less dense than that.
Right. But something that council approved.
Yes.
Less than a month ago.
Yes.
Ms. Dozman.
So because this is the ODP phase, how binding is the architectural requirements with the 30% front facades and prohibiting the flat roofs?
Those standards that we write in there are very binding. It's a plan development. Those development standards are recorded with the document with Jefferson County. If they come in with a plan where they want to deviate from that, we would make them go through a zone change again.
So currently, it is only proposed for 16 units, so they cannot go above that then, correct?
Correct.
Before, Mr. Urban.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This may be a question for the developer, but I'm not quite certain. As it relates to the homeowners association or other mechanism to either own that private drive or to maintain the property, is there a plan or a thought as it relates to how that HOA is set up or whether it's a special district?
I haven't heard any discussion about a special district. Typically, when we have a development like this where it's common elements, such as the street, which is not going to be a dedicated public street, meaning the city won't maintain that, we would require a homeowners association for maintenance of that and the detention area, and we would review those the homeowners covenants before they get recorded and before we issue any sort of development permits.
Okay, I guess I'm curious as to whether it would be an HOA or whether it would be a metropolitan district.
I think an HOA.
A project of this size warrants a special district, so it'll be an HOA, most likely owned and operated and, by the homeowners who live in the development.
And I guess as far as it being a private drive versus a public drive, what's the costs and benefits to having one or the other?
The reason we wanted to do a private drive here is because the smallest local street section, if you were to put that through the site, or even a lot of people have mentioned doing the same thing at Iris Court, if you would just transpose that street and cul-de-sac onto this property, it would take up a majority of the property, and it makes it very awkward to try to fit units in areas with either of the configurations, either with a local street coming through here or doing a private or a local street with a cul-de-sac. And that's mostly because of that weird angled southern property line.
Okay, and then I believe I saw in here, but as it relates to that, the curve on that private drive, has the fire department signed off as far as that's concerned, or what's been the review of that?
Yeah, so the fire department has looked at it. I've also met with them in person and having conversations with them. The radiuses do meet all of their requirements, as do basically in the SDP phase, we'll have to show that they can access all the roofs, but we've kind of already preliminary gone through that because, again, from 38th Avenue, looking at the property, they will almost appear as two-story buildings, so it's very easy for them to access the roofs in a case of a fire there. And all the units to the south of that private drive are limited to two-story max by the ODP, so again, it'll be very easy for them to access.
And will there be additional fire hydrants installed within this site, or how is that?
Yeah, I believe that one fire hydrant will be required. I don't know exactly if it'll come off of 38th or Johnson at this point in time, but the fire department will tell us where they would like a fire hydrant, and we'll have it installed.
Thank you.
Before I close the public hearing and ask for a motion and council discussion, does council have any other questions for the applicant or the staff? Ms. Dozman.
Thank you. Meredith, can you just speak to the specifics, or maybe the developer can speak to the specifics of the parking? It's noted in here that there are 2 garage spaces, and then parking at the entrances, and then additional parking on Johnson. How much traffic or how much parking can Johnson adequately provide?
Okay. Well, the parking standards vary according to the use. For a single-family residence, there's a requirement, if there's street parking, that they only need 2 on site. If there's no street parking, they need 4 on site. With this kind of development, it is a planned development, and the requirements are somewhat less. They do have the 2 units, 2 parking spaces per unit, And then the overflow parking, some in this area and some in this area. I believe 3 cars can be accommodated along Johnson on their frontage.
Ms. Davis.
I have just one more question on the gentleman that commented on the accidents. Where did you get that information? And then I just want to follow up with Patrick to see if he's heard from the police chief since we made that request. Oh, I'm sorry.
I know I can answer that question. It's on the Jefferson County website. And I got there through a weird way, but through interactive maps, but they actually have a database there and it shows different intersections, and you can zoom in, you can even see what kind of accidents there were.
Patrick, have we heard from?
I was a little confused. I wasn't sure if they were talking about 38th and Johnson or 38th and Kipling. I heard both.
Johnson.
I must have misspoken, that it's 38th and Johnson that we were talking about.
Okay. The chief did respond. He doesn't believe that there's been many accidents there. I know there's definitely a few accidents at 38th and Kipling. He would have to check with our analyst in the police department tomorrow to get the exact count, but he says he doesn't feel that's a major accident-prone intersection, 38th and Johnson.
Thank you. Mr. Matthews.
I'm concerned on that same issue because if you will notice, I'm looking at one drawing here. That isn't just a typical street. That's the main thoroughfare for Discovery Park. And if you will look at this map here, there's an awful lot of cars that park and drive out of Discovery Park, and especially on weekends. But that does get congested in that area, and when you start parking on Johnson Street, you've got kids going to and from cars. I'm not really pleased with the idea of using Johnson Park for parking. If I go up to a duplex about 3 blocks east of here, each driveway in the duplexes has 5 cars parked every night. And I just think we're just shoveling off on-street parking where it's already crowded and congested. I just don't believe that this fits the community down there.
Before I close the public hearing, are there any more questions of council, of staff, or the applicant? I'm going to close the public hearing, and a motion is in order. Mr. Pond.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I move to approve Council Bill number 17-2018, an ordinance approving rezoning for property located at 9800 West 38th Avenue from residential 1 to planned residential development, and for an outline development plan on second reading, and that it take effect 15 days after final publication.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. We will take discussion on the motion among council. Is there discussion on the motion? Mr. Matthews.
I have one other comment, and that's the 15-foot offset to 38th Avenue. As you go all the way up and down 38th Avenue, houses are offset in the neighborhood of 30 to 50 feet, and all of a sudden we're going to build a wall there that's going to look very strange. Even the houses on Iris Court, you can see it here, are set back more than 15 feet. And why don't we just build it to do what we're doing elsewhere, build it to the sidewalk if we're going to do that. It's just not going to fit the rural atmosphere of this neighborhood and what we're trying to, I think, accomplish and save in Wheat Ridge. Thank you.
Ms. Duran.
Thank you. I wanted to say that I have more questions than answers this evening after all of this presentation. I'm concerned about safety. I'm concerned about the neighborhood. I'm concerned about Apple Ridge, what's down the road for that. So because I have so many questions and I feel like we're just pushing this through right now, and we need to give it our due diligence, I'm going to have to be voting no on this. So thank you.
Additional discussion, Mr. Fitzgerald.
This is hard for me because everybody in this audience is my constituent, so it makes it very difficult for me. My experience has been that everything we do here is kind of half good and half bad, and I think this is a case that is half good and half bad. There are several things I really don't like about this. I don't think there is enough parking, for example. On the other hand, I ask myself, what is the best use for this site that we can expect? And I don't think this site is ever going to be developed as a commercial site, and I don't think it is reasonable to expect that this could have lower density, or very much lower density at least, and still pay a developer to do. So I will grit my teeth and vote yes for this.
Ms. Davis?
So I have just a couple comments, and some of it is based off of, I mean, I know there's been some comments, you know, about it's, you know, the neighborhood, and I completely understand, and I appreciate all the folks that have come in. I think that a lot of people that spoke, they weren't against development. I think they were worried that this would be, I think the word, a toehold. That it's all of a sudden going to happen to their neighborhoods or their homes. And I have to kind of refer back to what council approved with the Yarrow townhomes, because I don't see it that differently. And in that case, that is my backyard, and I have lived there for 51 years, and I'm 51 years old. So that is my backyard. And I think that, I think there's been some reasonable, I could see the density of being 25 was a lot. I think that based off of a couple comments, I think that some neighbors feel like their voices were heard and changes were made, and I think changes are difficult. I just want to go over some things, because people are saying respecting the neighborhood and conforming. Well, I know that area, of course, because we all do. But conforming, because right above it are duplexes. So I'm not sure how this wouldn't conform with the area right above it. Sure, is it the ones right next to it? No, but I'm not sure which neighborhood would we be conforming to. I think that the developer discussed the change in the roofs, in that they weren't going to do flat roofs. They weren't even going to be peaked roof. They were going to be this kind of roof, so that would make Dorothy happy, I know that. So I think that they're working on that and respecting the neighborhood there. I think some of the design, and again, we know those duplexes up on Otis, or was that the street name? They're higher up, and so there was the respect of making sure that the view's not gone there. I think parking is always an issue. I live in a ranch home, and parking's an issue there. You know, how do we limit it? I get people who have their SUVs and then their utility vehicles and then their camper and those types of things. How do we even limit that in our current R1 neighborhoods? So I think that's tough to say, you know, we can't do that. And then I do agree, again, we've had a lot of people come in and talk about housing and the cost of housing. You know, I'm not sure about anybody in the audience, but I wouldn't buy $1 million home right there next to Apple Ridge Cafe. So again, the reasonableness of maybe putting 2 homes there and calling it $1 million is a lot different than across, you know, the way over off of 38th, further west and kind of closer to Applewood. Again, I'm going to talk about, you know, what we've done previously. We put, you know, in Yarrow Court, that's right behind an elementary school, and traffic and those types of things with 80 units. I don't know as a council how we can decide that right behind an elementary school is different than being completely blocked from Wheat Ridge or Everett Middle School. I mean, it's I can't believe that we're caught talking traffic about a middle school when, again, as a council, we just agreed to put up 80-something units right behind an elementary school. So I struggle with using that as our theory either. I do feel that the developer has worked with the surrounding areas to buffer the homes that are already existing. I know there was a comment made about, well, they need more yards. Well, not everybody wants a yard. So do they need more yards? You know, because the people going in here today are that are going to buy these units know that there's not a yard, and they're going to choose that there's no yard. So they might not want my big yard or your big yard. They might want a small yard that they can go spend their weekends hiking instead. So I think that I think that requests have been made. I think that the developer has, really worked to make this the best of both worlds. I understand. I have big townhomes, big units going up in my neighborhood too. But again, it kind of goes back to where we are in the housing, the cost of housing, and really this location. It's not reasonable to put $1 million homes on this lot. So I will be supporting this.
Mr. Pond.
Thank you. Thanks to staff and everyone who showed up tonight, and to do all the work. And as Tim said, it's humbling because you guys are all of our constituents, and it's intimidating to be up here and having to go through this, which is why when we had a little public get-together, I think, and it was before this was an application, we met with you and talked about it, and I think I had told everyone to run for city council. This is why, so you can come up here and enjoy the pressure and the view from up here. But honestly, I really appreciate everyone staying with this and doing it. As it sits right now, I will disappoint you as well. I'm with on the for approving this right now, and I'm going to go through a few of my thoughts on that as carefully as I can, because it's important, I think, for me to express it and for you to hear it. In no particular order, as I go through the criteria, and obviously some of you have, and we may see that differently, but that criteria for zoning change is very important and obviously the basis of our decision. And as I look at those criteria, I do believe that they have been met, and the ones that are non-applicable, I think I agree with as well. I will say, and it's already been set up here, that the one factor that gives me more pause than anything else on this is the parking, not the traffic. I do believe I agree with the analysis and the interpretation of the traffic, but the parking I can honestly see as an issue. So, I hold that up as a concern, not so much, I think, that it falls apart for me. I will say that when we talked to you before this was an application at all, it was sounded much different than this, and it appears as though there's been a lot of work that's been done between you and the developer or the applicant. And I can hear that. I can hear that in the number of meetings that took place, and I can see it in what is a plan that's not the plan that was described, to me at a time that there wasn't a plan, but obviously there was, perhaps 23 units and all at 35 or something like that. So I do believe that there's been compromise to this, in many ways driven by the dialogue that you've had as a neighborhood and that we've had as a council over a while now, inclusive of some of the public comment that you heard at the beginning of this meeting, obviously related to density and height. And you know what, honestly, this application, in many ways, over the last applications that have come through, seems to be as responsive or more responsive to those community issues and those community requests than the ones that we've seen previously. I just need to tell you that because you're not here every Monday. You're welcome to be here every Monday, but usually you're not. And we have seen cases like this. And in fact, I feel like this one, has progressed in a way that in some ways we haven't seen, where some of the dialogue about density, height, architectural elements like roof lines, flat versus sloped, have been contentious issues, but I have not seen them always discussed between the applicant, the developer, and the neighborhood. In fact, a lot of robust work seems to have been done by that. Not so much, obviously, that everyone is in agreement, and that's clearly what makes it hard. I look at it like Tim. This is very much a mix of good and bad. And just to sum up, I think I'll reflect a couple of things that have been said already that I agree. This is it's a fair request and a fair exercise, obviously, within our codes, everything that's happened. And I think there's been great pains to try to massage all of that inside of the best package. It's why we have, I think, this process, because, and Councilman Fitzgerald mentioned it, this is a very difficult site. And in fact, this is all the work and conversation that was necessary to try to get to a place where this site actually could be positively developed, for our community. And now we won't all agree on what that we're gonna reap positive rewards from this. But I do believe that this is a very good development, in total, and that the impacts, can be mitigated. And as already has been stated, we've have been developed elsewhere in this community. And some of the things like the parking and the traffic, I hope we will continue to work on as we get to the SDP.
Thank you. Further discussion, Ms. Dozman.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just want to kind of reflect some of the comments that have already been made. I did have several questions that I felt were adequately answered by staff, and I really appreciate all of the hard work that staff has committed to this project. And I really want to thank the developer for listening to the concerns of the constituents and coming to what I feel is a good compromise for the community. I would much rather see residential homes at this site than a commercial development. And we very well could see a commercial development here because of the challenges that the property poses. I would love to see this site attract young families that are putting students in our schools. A big part of why I decided to run for council is because our elementary schools have continually been put on closure lists and they directly state that it's because of low enrollment. If we are not attracting young families, and if we are not going along with what the public needs as far as infrastructure goes, then we are not going to be revitalizing our community and allowing for the future to be the future and take over. I feel like the developer has done a wonderful job at having robust community input meetings. We've come down from 23 units to 16. I did have, my main concern has been parking, which I think that two spaces per garage unit or per unit is adequate for the living space. And I would really just kind of like to state that it was said many times that we're against scrape and builds like North Denver, but this is not a scrape property. There is nothing on the site to be scraped and to be replaced with, and I would really like to see this site developed. So I will be in support of this.
Thank you. Additional comments from staff or from council? Will the clerk please poll the council?
The vote is 5-3. Mr. Dahl?
Motion fails.
Motion fails because the charter requires 6 votes.
We will stand at about a 10-minute recess. and ask Ms. Davis to introduce item number 2, please.
Oh, well, I'm out of juice, so I'm gonna have to borrow.
Here, you want to...
All right. And listen, my voice carries like crazy. I don't even need a mic. All right. Council Bill number 22-2018, an ordinance creating a new section 26-643 of the Wheat Ridge Code of Laws prohibiting the use of freestanding emergency room facilities. At issue, the ordinance revises the Code of Laws to prohibit freestanding emergency room facilities throughout the city. The City Council adopted a moratorium on new freestanding emergency rooms to enable the staff and council to review the city's regulations and options. The moratorium was extended to August 27, 2018. On July 18, City Council directed that an ordinance be brought forth prohibiting the use throughout the city.
Thank you. This is an ordinance on first reading. A motion is in order.
Oh, did I say it was June 18th? My apologies.
Okay. Please provide us with a motion.
All right, thank you. I move to approve Council Bill number 22-2018, an ordinance creating a new section 26-643 of the Wheat Ridge Code of Laws prohibiting the use of freestanding emergency room facilities on first reading, order it published, public hearing set for Monday, August 13th, 2018 at 7 p.m. in City Council chambers, and that it take effect immediately upon council adoption.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Would the clerk please poll the council?
Motion carries 8-0.
Thank you. Item number 3, Ms. Hoppy, would you please introduce item number 3?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Council Bill number 21-2018, an ordinance adopting a new section 2-9 of the Wheat Ridge Code of Laws concerning the retention of interest earned on escrow accounts held by the city. At issue, City Treasurer DiTullio has determined that there is a significant cost associated with city staff receiving and administering monies deposited into multiple escrow accounts for various purposes mandated by the Code of Laws. Exact accounting and record keeping of each small escrow account and interest earned thereof would be extremely burdensome and impractical for city staff to reasonably achieve. This code amendment will allow the city to retain interest on such escrow accounts. Treasurer DiTullio has reviewed the ordinance and supports the code change. Additionally, the treasurer has also recommended that all future escrow documents clearly state that escrow funds are not paid interest.
Thank you. This is an ordinance on first reading. A motion is in order.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I move to approve Council Bill number 21-2018, an ordinance adopting a new section 2-9 of the Wheat Ridge Code of Laws concerning the retention of interest earned on escrow accounts held by the city. On first reading, order it published, public hearing set for Monday, August 13th at 7 p.m. in City Council chambers, and it take effect 15 days after final publication.
Second.
Who had the second? Ms. Duran. Will the clerk please poll the council?
Motion carries 8-0.
Thank you. That was item number. We will go to item number 4. Ms. Dozeman, would you please introduce item number 4?
Yes, thank you. Resolution number 47-2018, a resolution in support of the recommendation to create RTD youth and low-income passes and low-income program for families. Issue, RTD's Rider Pass programs were evaluated by a 25-member working group. This resolution supports the working group's recommendation to create RTD youth and low-income passes and low-income programs for families.
Thank you. Mr. Goff, do we have a staff report on this?
I don't this evening. I would
Okay.
happy to answer any questions.
All right. The basis of this, or the information was contained in your folder. Are there any questions or discussions on this item? Seeing none, a motion would be in order.
I move to approve resolution number 47-2018, a resolution in support of the recommendation to create RTD youth and low-income passes and low-income program for families.
Second.
There's a motion and a second by Mr. Pine. Is there discussion on the motion? Will the clerk please poll the council?
Motion carries 8-0.
Thank you. We'll move to item number 5, Mr. Fitzgerald.
Resolution number 46-2018, a resolution endorsing a statewide transportation sales tax solution. Issue: a coalition of organizations from across the state of Colorado are advocating a 0.62% increase in state sales tax rate to increase revenue for transportation projects. The Let's Go Colorado campaign is collecting the necessary signatures to include a question on the November 2018 ballot. This resolution endorses the proposed ballot question.
Thank you. Mr. Goff, do we have any proposal or any information on this one? Or just
I don't. I'll just say that the Let's Go Colorado campaign was at the City Council's last study session and provided a presentation and their justification for the sales tax increase. And there was consensus from City Council that evening to bring this resolution forward for consideration. The City of Wheat Ridge, if this did pass, would potentially receive an additional $1.1 million in new revenues that could be used for transportation projects.
Thank you.
Is the resolution in order?
Yes, sir.
I move to approve resolution number 46-2018, a resolution endorsing a statewide transportation sales tax.
Is there a second?
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Is there any discussion on the motion? Will the clerk please poll the council?
Motion carries 6-2 with council members Matthews and Dozeman voting no.
Thank you. That concludes our regular agenda items. We'll move to city managers' matters. Mr. Goff.
I don't have anything this evening. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Mr. Dahl, city attorney's matters.
Sure, we'll get to that executive session on the agenda in a minute. But let me just, at the mayor's request, to make a few points about what number of votes are required for various things. You had two good examples, actually, last week and this, or last meeting and this. All ordinances require a majority of the entire council, says Charter Section 5.9. A majority of the entire council, of course, is 5. Many times in the past I've been asked, well, suppose there's a 4-4 tie. The mayor is required by other provisions of the charter to break ties. And it's very clear to me that in the event there's a 4-4 vote on an ordinance, the mayor breaks that tie, that's the 5th vote in the ordinance, and that ordinance passes. It doesn't happen very often, but sometimes. If there's a 3-3 tie on an ordinance, the mayor is required to break the tie, but it's not enough, because it's not, that 4 votes, no matter how constituted, is still not a majority. And so it's one of those kind of little wrinkles, and you have to kind of follow the charter through. I think there's probably been some impression that only rezoning ordinances require 5 votes. All ordinances require 5 votes for passage, because that's Charter Section 5.9. The issue has come up more recently, frankly, where it's a little closer on rezoning. Other ordinances are less controversial, but nevertheless, it has to be 5 votes, except for 2 exceptions. One is Charter Section 510, where you have a rezoning matter that has a protest. That kicks it up to 6 votes, and we saw that requirement here tonight, and that's also in the charter. I think it's in the code as well. And secondly, something you saw, I think, in study session recently, sale of property requires 3/4 majority of the council, unless it's sale or disposition of parkland, which is the entire council, all 8 votes. So those are the exceptions to the 5 votes for an ordinance rule, and why you have the 6 votes on a rezoning ordinance with a protest. I know you probably know this, but every now and again it's helpful to remind you of it, and we've got these recent examples that are really good teaching tools, and so I thought I'd take that opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you. Do you have anything else to?
No, nothing else.
Deliver tonight? Thank you. We'll go to elected officials matters and start with Clerk Shaver.
I have nothing tonight, thank you.
Thank you. We'll go to the elected officials. Mr. Matthews.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. We just got an announcement from Mr. Goff, and also it was on the internet today. I saw him, so I downloaded it, that they're going to start testing on the G line, and you may have better information than I got off of there, but It's going to start running at 21-hour-a-day testing and at least 3 trains. So maybe by fourth quarter, we actually may see something break and open up there. I don't anticipate it until September, unfortunately. Another issue that I would like to bring up for all people, since we were just talking about sales tax and building roads, the governor of the state just did an executive order to bring in some California emissions laws into our state, and I wish everyone would do some research on that. I have an article here, and the title is Cloning California Car Mandates Will Cost Coloradans Dearly. And I realize that's one side of the argument, but please, everyone, walk into this deal with your eyes wide open, because there's actually an argument out there that if we do this LEV, low emissions vehicle standards, it will actually increase emissions, because unfortunately electric cars may not do anything themselves, but the power plants do. And so you have to look at the big picture and everything that goes on with that. So please, everyone, just be aware of that and do your own homework and draw your own conclusions. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Duran?
Nothing tonight, thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Dozman?
Yes, thank you. I would just like to remind the public that the 49th Annual Wheat Ridge Carnation Festival is the second weekend of August. So that's Friday, August 10th through Sunday, August 12th. And I would like to congratulate this year's royalty. Amanda Weaver of Five Fridges Farm was elected as our countess. And then former Wheat Ridge High School principal Griff Worth will be our count. And then SCL Health, Lutheran Medical Center, and Lutheran Foundation are going to represent our Grand Marshal this year. So I would just like to congratulate them. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Hoppy?
Nothing tonight, thank you.
Ms. Davis?
Thank you. I just wanted to share a great community effort that took place in District 2. It was organized by Kayla Heaton and also Jessica Fazy, but they had a lot of help. So just, I'm sure I'm not going to get all the names, so I apologize in advance, but Christine Frazier had purchased drinks, donuts, and pizza, and pizza was donated actually by Pietra's. But what they did was, this event was organized by the Wheat Ridge Gardeners, and they, a group of 20 plus people worked together to help an elderly woman take care of her yard. I guess it was in tough shape, and this group of folks all pulled together and spent their weekend pulling weeds, and there was some anonymous donors that gave money, and they were able to purchase some flowers and soil. But some people, and not everyone, so I apologize. Send me your names if I missed you, and I'll put it on my website or on Facebook. But Leslie Langston, Christine Disney, Heather Vanderberg, Brittany Garrison, Puegas and husband, Kathleen Martell, Leah Miller, Chris Heaton, Keely Sky, Abby Redmond and her husband, Melanie Fine, Carol Matthews. We also had some missionaries there that helped mow her lawn every week. But I think it's just a great effort by the members in our community for someone reaching out and a group helping. And I think they're probably a little embarrassed that I'm recognizing them, because I don't know, they didn't do it for the recognition, they did it because of the heart. So I wanted to thank everybody in those efforts, and I'm sure there's more of that going on, and thank people for that.
Great city we live in. Mr. Urban?
Nothing tonight, thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Pond?
Nothing tonight.
Thank you, Mr.
Mayor. May I make one addendum to mine?
Well, I'm going to go back to you right now, Mr.
Thank you,
Matthews.
sir. My wife had the opportunity to go to a performance in the park the other day in the afternoon. It was for the Kidlings. And she was just greatly impressed with the turnout and the enthusiasm and the success of that operation down at Anderson Park. She just thought it was just tremendous. And I would like to thank everybody that's involved. And I know one and forgive me, I can't remember his name now, when someone has been kind of managing these for a long time, and he's semi-retired on that issue now. But I highly recommend that everybody be cognizant of and take advantage of these performances in the park. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Once again, great city we live in. Mr. Fitzgerald.
I have a motion to make.
Well, just
Before you do that, Mr. Mayor, I thought, can I add one more thing? I thought maybe someone on council would mention this, so I didn't do it. But Tuesday, August 7th is National Night Out, and we are going to have a study session on the 6th, the night before, so someone could mention it then. But I wanted to mention it to the public. There will be things going on here at City Hall that night, the police department, fire, and various things. But it's also, National Night Out was started initially as a night for neighbors to get together with their neighbors. And one of the first activities that ever happened to that was people were encouraged to turn their porch lights on and also make those little, I don't know what they're called. It's a paper bag with sand in it and a candle. What are those called? Somebody help me.
Luminaires.
Luminaires, yeah. And put those on their sidewalk or near their front door or something like that. And but it isn't just come to City Hall and let the kids climb in a fire truck or do something with the police. It's supposed to really be for the neighborhoods to get out at night and meet your neighbors and promote safety and stuff like that too. So I wanted to mention it during elected officials matters a little bit before the night before. So
Mr. Mayor.
That's all.
thank you.
One addendum as well.
Mr. Urban, coming back to you now.
And it's worth it. For the National Night Out, can we ask the police to do a rendition of their Thunder by Imagine Dragons again? They did a great job with their lip sync battle. I want to congratulate them on that.
Thank you. Okay, Mr. Fitzgerald, going back to you.
Are you wanting to go back? Ready for this?
Do you have anything for elected officials matters?
I have nothing for elected official matter.
Mr. Fitzgerald, I've given Mr. Fitzgerald a motion to go in executive session.
I know you have. We're not quite there yet.
Oh, okay, he's about to make it, I think.
No, he's not.
No, he's not. Even better.
Because there's still one elected official that we haven't gotten to. So, with your permission, I would like to thank all of the people who showed up at council tonight with a lot of passion, a lot of thoughtful reflection about what happens in their communities, and I applaud that. It makes it uncomfortable to sit up here and sometimes and have to listen to the diversity of opinion that we have in our city, but it's very healthy for us to do that. And as elected officials, we have that obligation to listen and consider all of the angles and all the facts that go into a case. And so I want to thank people for coming to council and talking to their elected officials, because this is where it really happens. So with that, I have no more on elected officials matter. Now we have a motion to adjourn to go into executive session. I would like to go to our city attorney, Mr. Dahl, for a little background information on this.
Thank you very much. This involves whether we need some direction from council regarding the collection of excess revenues as a result of the 2E measure. And I'd set it up an executive session because I want to describe a case from El Paso County. But honestly, it was our intention to have the bulk of the discussion in open session. In light of the lateness of the hour and the fact that an executive session would drag you into that room and then back here, I really think I've spoken with Patrick, and I really think that we can compress things and just dispense with the need for an executive session this evening. And if you would agree with that, then I think it's a matter of a consensus to allow this to just be a regular agenda item at the end of the meeting. You would have had an agenda item anyhow because you would have gone executive session, come back to take any action. I'd like to save you that trouble.
Do we have any objection to discussing the topic for the executive session, which is excess revenue obligations under Tabor in open session.
No objections. Is a motion in order? Do we have to make that an
I
agenda
think
item?
We have consensus of council.
You have consensus, I think
If
it'll
there are
just
no
remain
objections,
as,
then we
I
have
think we're good.
consensus. Okay, let's go ahead, and then, Mr. Dahl, would you be making the presentation on this?
Yes, I will.
Thank you.
I may ask for Mr. Goff to catch anything I miss. Let me see if I can go through it quickly. You probably do have about a 2-page memo from Mr. Goff. Anybody need that? Okay. Okay. So in any event, the Article 20 section, or excuse me, Article 10, Section 20 of the Constitution is the Tabor Amendment. And without diving too deep into it, I'll tell you that to the extent a new tax brings in more revenue than estimated, you have to do one of two things. Estimated in your election notice. I mean, there's that Tabor notice, that goes out 40, 45 days ahead, has arguments for and against. You've got a choice. If you bring in too much money or more than you estimated, you either refund that money or you seek voter approval to retain it. And that's what Tabor, the language of the Constitution says. Well, the city had the 2E question on the ballot in November 2016, and you'll see in the memo the key number. There are a lot of numbers there, but the key number is the estimated 2017 tax increase authorized, $3,700,000, if you see that number. Well, then the next line, you see what actually came in at $4,157,900. So around $500,000, right? More than the estimated amount. So you would say, well, then that means we need, to either refund or go to election. And there really is a third door, believe it or not, as a result of a district court case in El Paso County that I want to mention in a minute. But those 3 doors that you have that we need direction from you on so staff can know what to do. Or the first would be put together a ballot question, bring it to you on August the 13th, kind of a straight up, can we retain the money question. Fort Collins did a similar question, as you see, where they were over their estimate. An example of their question is on the second page. It's pretty simple. There's a lot of detail in there that was specific to Fort Collins, but it really just says, may we keep the revenue from the 2010 voter approved measure without refunding any money. And it says that. So that's door 1. The other 2 doors, of course, are refund the excess revenue. This has happened a number of times in the state, and the courts have been very good about using or looking to the language of Tabor, which says you can use any reasonable method. You can't get exactitude. If you collected this much excess sales tax, from who? My mother who flies in from Minnesota and buys something in the city that's a retail sales tax. Do you try to look her up and refund that? No. So instead, any sort of reasonable method has been used. People have given free days at the rec center. They've done a tax forgiveness day for all taxes, all sales on a given day. There's almost any method if you make an earnest, kind of honest effort, the courts accept. There are very few times have methods not been allowed, and you'll see that Patrick has given you some detail on that. What I want to emphasize for the legal advice, and I'm happy to do it here, is door number 3, which is the do nothing, wait for the courts to decide. And actually the courts have, or at least one court has, and that's the district court down in El Paso County. El Paso County had a similar question saying, can we raise, can we impose a sales tax? I think it was a sales tax, might have been property, in any event. And their estimate was off. Their estimate was less than what was actually collected in the first year. But their question also had the language that all questions these days have, and which 2E had, which is, and may we collect and retain and spend all revenues, key phrase, all revenues, from that tax, free from the requirements of Tabor. I'm really simplifying, but that's what the city's ballot question said, it's what El Paso's ballot question said. And the district court said that that ballot language, when approved by the voters, overrides the Tabor restriction that says when you have excess, you've got to refund it or ask for the voters because you've asked them. And they've said yes, and it's the all revenues language that matters. Now, that case came up on a challenge by Douglas Bruce, and he's filed his appeal with the Court of Appeals. I've seen the opening brief. El Paso County is still considering whether they will just go to election anyhow and do it that way and obviate the need to get a Court of Appeals decision. But I wanted to identify that third door for you. That decision came down in March of this year, so it's just a few months old now. I'm giving you the considerations are given to you in the memo, and any appeal, it'll be at least a year in the Court of Appeals, and while the city could wait, in the event the Court of Appeals says no, we agree with Mr. Bruce and we disagree with El Paso County, then you've not had your election and you're still going to need to refund or have an election, and you will have not refunded in time. You have to refund with a penalty. So there's that. But it is clearly one door, and I know some cities around the state are considering that door, and it will, when there's an appellate decision on it, we may well see that if it upholds the district court, we may well see that used by others. It's a little early yet because we don't have an appellate decision, and the district court decision in El Paso County does not bind the city and doesn't give the city direct protection. So that's a quick thumbnail sketch of the three doors you have. In each case, we would need some direction from you. If you want to refer it, you'll need to take a motion, in my opinion, directing city manager and I to put together ballot language that can come to you next meeting. We're going to have ballot language, I think, on that broadband anyhow, so will be easy to do that. If you want to refund, I think you need to direct that's the door, and city manager, please bring to us your proposed method for refund. And if you want to do nothing, then that's a little easier to tell us to do. Thanks for your time. Obviously now it's questions.
Questions. We'll start with Mr. Pond.
So just so that I can understand, this is for 2017. Do we have this? This is a potential issue rolling forward. Is that correct? No.
No, just for the single year. The Tabor requirement is just that first year.
Yeah.
Because you have just sort of an estimate for the first year.
For the first year.
Tabor says take your best crack at an estimate for the first
Right.
year. It doesn't say keep estimating.
Great. No, that helps.
Well, and that's why they call it the underestimate clause, because they don't want municipalities underestimating to convince voters that this is a low tax, so just vote for it. They want you to get as close as possible. So that was the reason Douglas Bruce put that language in that stipulation in the Tabor language.
Ms. Stozman.
Would the ballot initiative specify what the money would go towards? Like how general or how specific do we need to be?
I'm sorry. I was just, there was that example from Fort Collins on the back, and the reason they had it broken down into those different areas, because that's what their original ballot question was supposed to be sent, the money was going to be spent on, and I was just thinking about we could do the same based on the proportional amount of how much revenues were going to each of our 4 projects. So if just as a suggestion, the Ward TOD station was 12 million of the 33 million, so we could say 37% of the excess would go for that project, 30% for the Hook Ramps, 21% for Wadsworth, and 12% for Anderson Park. I think they would have to go for the 2E projects because that's what the money was originally voted for, but you could be that specific and break it down by those percentages if you want.
Thank you. Additional questions? Mr. Matthews.
Yeah, I think I got a couple of them asked because I was going to ask about next year, but you answered that one. Since this is before the court, is there any sneaky lawyer provision for putting this into an escrow account where it would not get commingled with other city funds to be determined at the final, when the court case finally is decided?
That's a good question. I think that absent the requirement of Tabor that it be refunded promptly, I think that would work. But because you have, if you're into refund territory, that must be a prompt refund. Putting in an escrow wouldn't achieve that. That's the right question to ask, but I think my take on that is no, that you'd need to actually refund it if in a prompt way.
But these funds are already segregated, are they not? Yes. Yes. Okay. Additional, Mr. Urban?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I guess as it relates to that 457,000 going to the 2E projects, that would go to pay down the bonds on that project and therefore make it so that those bonds would be paid off sooner rather than later, correct?
Yeah, no, that's a good point, Mr. Urban. I think that's another benefit of asking the voters to keep the money because it just reduces the bond debt service quicker.
Okay, thank you.
Additional questions, Ms. Davis?
So I think all my questions were answered, but I think it's good for people to hear out in TV land that it looks like the approximate refund was $14.72 a resident. So it's not like we're all would be getting like $2,000 back or something. So I think that's good for folks to know. And I just think that the ballot question, I think for the monies to go back because you never know what the next year's will bring as far as revenue. So I think to have that little extra would help with the projects.
Ms. Hoppy?
Yeah, I agree with door number one. I'd like to ask our citizens if we can keep the $14 per citizen to add to our 2E projects.
Mr. Mayor.
Mr. Urban?
So at 4 projects, it'd be about 114,000 apiece, or is there a more appropriate division of those funds per project, or how do we divide that amongst those 4?
If you want to divide it up proportionally based on how much money was in the original ballot question, you could do that. The Ward station, the 33 million, 37% of that went to the Ward TOD station. You could do 33% of this if you want. Or you could just split it evenly. It really wouldn't matter. Or you could put it towards the project that may need the money. We know right now the Hook Grant project is we only have 10 million from the 2E fund, but the estimate at this point it's closer to 16 million. So 400,000 is not going to help a lot for that, but you could put it 100% towards that. But it might be more transparent. It might make more sense to the voters if you just say it's going to go to all 4 projects. Also, it's.
I think just in general terms, when you have 25, 25, 25. Doesn't give people a chance to judge, why did you give this project 30 and this project 20? And so by dividing it equally across all projects, it keeps people from saying, well, why did you give this project more than that? When we're only talking 114,000 per project, it's not a budget breaker for any of them.
And Ms. Shaver, we talked about the cost of elections. So if we're going to go to the ballot, there would be a cost for that?
Yeah, and would this be considered a Tabor issue?
Such that we need to do the Tabor notices, I'm not sure. Let me think about that for a minute. But in any event, it'll be the coordinated election. So we're already sending one ballot question likely on the broadband. So it's really, from the county clerk and recorder standpoint, it's no real additional cost. I think it's a good question to ask, do we need to send a Tabor notice? I'm thinking no, because this is not a new tax. This is a request to retain a tax, excess revenues on a tax already approved by the voters subsequent to a Tabor notice. So I don't know, because otherwise you'd have to do the 4 years, et cetera, and this is not a new tax. This is just retaining a defined amount of money. It's a long way of saying, no, we'll just add this to the coordinated election if you go there, You're already giving them one ballot question, it won't cost anything more to give them another one.
But I think there is another cost, isn't there?
Yeah, there will be an extra cost, and depending on how long it is, I'd have to ask Cynthia out at the county about how much that's going to be. We have about already, I think it's 25,000 in the budget regularly for elections. In the clerk's budget, probably Mr. Goff can pull that up pretty quick.
While I was doing that, what we could easily do, if you direct us to go down the ballot question route, we can not only bring you the language, but an estimate of what the additional cost of for the county clerk would be, so that you have both of those pieces of information.
We have 26,000 budgeted this year. We spent, just to give you some examples, in 2016 we spent 25,000, and that was a general. That wasn't
that 2E?
Yeah. Yeah, that was our 2E question.
And that was a pretty long ballot question, so it might be a little bit less.
Mr. Pond?
Well, I don't disagree with maybe ultimately going to the ballot, but frankly, I want to tie it back to door number 3 here still a little bit. Because it seems reasonable, and I'm taking the shorthand from you, but it seems reasonable if we did actually ask that question in the original ballot, which by the way, intentionally and because of streamlining and not having to go back and do this again. So I actually feel like we should wait and wait that out. It seems like we have consensus, which is that, that we think it's more prudent to hold on to this money and put it back into these projects. I mean, that everyone agrees on that. The mechanism for doing that, I would first go to door number 3 and we can back up with doing this ballot initiative. And I know there's a cost to that, but at that point, the whatever penalty, 10% penalty, will go back to, if it comes to that, we'll either do a ballot or we'll give people $15 instead of $14, and they'll be really thrilled. But
it's clearly an available door.
Yeah, that would be that'd be my preference.
And as a larger answer to Councilmember Matthews' question, which is really kind of related to that really was your question. I didn't give you as good an answer probably as I could. We'd certainly, if you went that door, we'd certainly do everything we could to segregate the funds, to indicate that they're being held in the event, et cetera, et cetera. I don't know how much that helps you, with a penalty or attorney fees if someone were to bring the case to challenge. It could be a Douglas Bruce or someone like that could bring that case and say, why aren't you either refunding or going to election? Which is, why they've got the case in El Paso County. But if you went with door number 3, we'd certainly, do the most we could or to protect us. But your point, I think, is worst case scenario is 10% of, 497,000. That's not the end of the world.
In Fort Collins, the excess revenue came from a 2010 election, but they didn't go back to their voters until I think 2014 to ask them to keep the money, and they said yes. They were debating, I think, the same thing, and they felt they didn't have to go back to the voters, but they were pressured to, so they finally did. But I don't think they were sued. There was no penalty.
Mr. Fitzgerald.
Well, of the 3 doors, I prefer door number 1. I think we should go to a ballot. And the reason is pretty simple. We all agree that we need to keep the money. We should keep the money. But if we go to number 1, we will be free to use the money for whatever purposes most needs it. And this is an unusual one-time event anyway, so I really don't want to set any precedents here. door number 3 has the problem of the 10% penalty plus interest plus attorney's fees. So we don't know what that would be. And I doubt that CIRSA won't help us with this, I presume. So, we don't know what the attorney fees would be. So door number 3 could actually end up being a significant cost. Door number 2, mailing back $14.72. I don't know what the cost of mailing is, but, that really seems silly to me to spend $1 or $2 to mail back $14.72. We need the money. We have needs for it. So, although I don't like the language from Fort Collins, I would vote for door number 1.
Ms. Duran.
Thank you. I'd rather be proactive and go with door number 1, and then also specifying that the excess does go to the 2E projects. I think that would put everybody's mind at ease there too. So,
Ms. Davis.
So I have just a quick question. So if we were to go the route of door number 3, I'm kind of on the fence of 1 and 3, but it sounds like for Collins, they waited like 4 years, where we're doing this like okay, we're going to do it right now. So I mean, I guess my other thing is to even offset like costs of what a ballot would be if like the city is not necessarily putting anything on the ballot this year, but potentially we do it the following year, when we vote for re-election for council and elections and that type of thing. Would it be a cost difference if we did it, if we decide to do it not this year, but next year?
Oh, you mean because
maybe
it's with a general
Wheat Ridge doesn't
general
really
election
have an
and-
issue, so is it a difference?
I can't answer that. I don't know. I would have to talk to the county people and ask them.
And the Tabor revision does, it does state that you're supposed to do it the next fiscal year.
Oh, it
so
does,
18.
okay.
But Fort Collins
All right.
didn't, because they were kind of, I think, fighting it, and they didn't believe they had to, but they finally decided to. Doesn't mean you can, it's just, the provision says you're supposed to do it the next year.
Ms. Duran.
don't we have another ballot question that we're proposing, the city, on broadband this year?
Yes.
Okay, just want to confirm that.
Mr. Urban.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. As it relates to the failure of this ballot question, what happens in that instance?
Well, then I think you've asked to retain. The voters have said no. And unless you want to do some kind of declaratory judgment action saying, well, they said no, but under the holding in the El Paso District Court, I think you'd have to give the, I think that you'd be back to door number 2, frankly, because unless you had, and maybe by then you have a Court of Appeals decision, but the problem is elections have consequences and meaning, and I think if you go to the voters with a question, it's not an advisory question. It's you are asking to retain, and if they say no, you may not, then I think what you've effectively done, I'm glad you asked the question, is kind of amended your original ballot question in a way, or, I think you're stuck with that result. I think you're done. I think you refund then.
Okay, and I guess, as it relates to these different options, when we look at the number 3, the do nothing option, that's at least a $45,000 cost with a 10% penalty, not including the interest or the attorney's fees. And so knowing that an election will cost $25,000, that's, I think, a much more reasonable way to go, and giving folks a percentage-wise, breakdown of what we're going to spend the money on, knowing that monies are going to pay down the bonds that have already been taken out and may reduce the time that we have to collect the 0.5% sales tax. I think people would vote for that. I just don't want people to assume that if you vote no, you're going to get your $14 back. But that's not the case. That's not how this works. It has to be, failed or succeeded. So,
Ms. Davis?
So I just have one other question with the $14.72 or whatever. I would also hope that if that is the case, so worst case scenario, which I would hope not, but if it failed, I would hope that that 1472, we would take out the administrative costs of what it would cost to issue that check. So really they would get, let's pretend, $12.18 because we had to mail, cut checks, had staff try to figure out who lives in Wheat Ridge and those types of things. Can you, I mean,
Yeah, I don't know.
I'm just
I'm not
trying
sure
to
if that's
think of-
allowed or not. You can deduct an administrative cost. We'd have to check into that. But you wouldn't have to send a check for 1472. There's other means. You could do a free rec center for whatever, or a sales tax holiday, or reduce your property tax mill levy temporarily.
And the jurisdictions that have had to refund or chosen to refund really haven't gotten into the generating checks.
Okay.
Because it's just a huge cost, as you
Yeah.
point out. Much easier to say the rec center's free on the 14th of this month, or advise their retailers that do not collect on the Friday after fourth Friday of the month or something, and it's a tax-free day. And you bring some estimating to the party when you figure out, okay, what do we typically collect on a Friday, fourth Friday of the month? This is what we collect. And you sort of figure, there's ways to end up at that number more easily than in individual checks.
Thank you. Mr. Dozman?
Thank you. So I'm just looking at this from a voter standpoint, and as a voter, I appreciate transparency and clarity. So I would be more in favor of, one, going to the public and being transparent and letting them know, like, we have this excess money, and this is exactly what we plan to do with it. And I think that they would be in favor of voting to keep it.
Ms. Hoppy?
I think at this time I'd like to ask for consensus to bring ballot language to us, but with two choices in the ballot language. One, as Mr. Urban had suggested, is just 25% going into each project, and then one, as Mr. Goff had, the numbers on the majority to the minority, and then we can decide which ballot language we like the most.
How does that sit with everyone? Let's see hands. We have consensus on that. Does that give you a direction to go to?
Yes, that's all I need. Thank you very much.
Is there any further business to come before the council?
Mr. Mayor.
One moment.
I just wanted to offer a little historic perspective on this, because I don't think any of you have been on council when we did a Tabor refund. Have you? I don't think. But anyway, I was a couple of times, and I can just tell you historically, even before I got on council, that the Wheat Ridge voters, now demographics are changing, but historically, Wheat Ridge voters have been very benevolent about letting the city keep that excess Tabor money if you are very specific about where it's going to. Sometimes cities just say, can we keep it? And then people don't know it's going in some black hole of, government bloat. But if you're, I remember specifically, maybe Mr. Dahl remembers, we had it was like $127,000 or something, and we said, can we keep that money and buy police radios with it? And it passed, no problem. I think another time it went for a cell tower, and that was, we didn't have our emergency, the police radio tower thing. We didn't have, it wasn't that much money, but it was over, and we had to give it back or ask the voters. And I remember Mr. Middock calculated that it would cost more to mail it out than we had to give it. So it was kind of silly. So we asked the voters, and if you be very specific about where it's going, I think they will approve it.
Thank you. Mr. Urban?
As it relates to the use of 2E funds to pay for this election, since it's related to 2E, is that permissible, or would this cost of the election not be a 2E related cost?
I would not think so.
Yeah, I don't I don't think so either. If there's an obligation to, to refund or ask to keep it, I think I think it would be unwise to put the cost of this election on, to take it out of the money that you're asking to keep.
We can check with our tax experts.
We'll
and
check.
Tabor experts, just so you know. We'll let you know.
Thank you.
It's a good question.
Okay. There being no more business to come before the council, we stand. Did you want something?
Yeah,
Okay, Mr. Fitzgerald.
Okay, I'd like to amend Ms. Hoppy's consensus so that we're not locked into those two variables of ballot language. Do you feel that we locked ourselves in with? No. Okay.
No, you'll see the ballot language, and I expect you'll pick one of those two doors or pick one and edit it a little bit. So, it'll be in front of you as a motion. You can change it around as much as you like.
Thank you. Any more for the good of the order? We're adjourned.